vibe.
What is up? I'm your host, Ricardo Vrenz, also known as Ricky Vrenz. This is another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Another great conversation. My last one was 2+ hours with John Barber, and I love those long conversations because sometimes the best parts of the conversation only happens at the end. And if the conversation didn't go that long, if they weren't 2 hours, then maybe that interesting topic or discussion would have never came about. So it's always super fun to have these type of discussions when the guest is available, when I'm available, and when the conversation is flowing. I definitely try to take advantage of it and keep it going. So, and give you guys longer episodes to kind of just get a chance to talk about everything and anything. And that's exactly what I do today with my guest, Charlie Robinson. He's an author. You guys might know the book, The Octopus of Global Control. He's been on the Tinfoil Hat podcast. He's been on quite a few podcasts. Look him up. He's done a bunch of interviews. He's also been on my show before. Go in the archives, check out that episode. We really go into his book and you know, some of the topics he talks about in his book. This show is kind of a conversation about everything. So I'm probably going to call it that because that's kind of what it is. It's a little bit of everything. We talk about so many. I mean, I don't even know where to start. So I'm not even going to tell you what we talk about. Obviously, some of the typical stuff like history and media and the isms, capitalism, libertarian philosophy and Marxism philosophy and all that stuff. But we also talk about personal stories and podcasts and so many other really interesting stuff. So it was fun to talk to Charlie for 2 hours and really be able to kind of just riff with him and have this discussion. So hopefully you guys are enjoying these longer podcasts. Like I always tell you, find us on YouTube, RV Theory 6, and any guest that calls in using video like Charlie did today and like John Barber did on the last episode. You can visually see the guest and I have the conversation. So please do that if you want to put faces to our voices. And in the show description on our YouTube channel, I also put links to our guests' websites, their social media accounts, all that stuff. So it's an easy way to connect with them or just look into their work and what they're doing if you find the discussion interesting. So also you'll find our Patreon page. You can go on there and I'll give you basically the only perk is I give you behind the scenes information. I'll let you know who's booked, when they're booked, and also show ideas I have coming up. And when I'm trying to put a show together, I'll let you know, hey, I'm trying to gather these guests together and whatnot. So really, I don't want to put a paywall because of the fact that, like I always tell you, these conversations are very important and I want them to spread like wildfire and really for the purpose of starting a ripple effect and sharing interesting ideas and discussions and whatnot. So you've heard it all before. So, and also after the last episode, I've gotten contacted by so many cool people. I keep saying it, but it keeps happening. I'm also going to be on another podcast soon. I'll keep you guys updated on that. So follow me on Twitter, RV Theory 6, Instagram, RV Theory 6, or friend request me and let me know you're a podcast listener or supporter. Just look up Ricky Vrenz and you'll be able to find me on Facebook. The Ripple Effect Podcast and Theory 6 both have Facebook pages, so like those pages and review the show, rate the show. Most importantly, share the show. Any discussion that you think is important or can be beneficial to anybody, please just text a link to a friend, share it on your social media. I believe that all these platforms are important because you never know who are on those platforms that aren't on others and can be exposed to this show and other interesting stuff. So I have some great shows coming up that I'm really excited about. So if you're a supporter on Patreon, you'll know who those are. And like I said, everybody who's been contacting me, letting me know when they like a show and letting me know when some specific discussion was really interesting to them or whatnot, I really, really appreciate it. I'm going to have to stop saying whatnot. I have so many bad habits that I'm amazed that you guys still listen to the show, but most likely it's because of the guests, not because of my long, awful rants. Enjoy the show, guys, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.
How are you?
Good. You hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Awesome. I hear you good, it seems.
I just got done last night watching your Richard Wolff interview.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I said, I think at some point on this show that I have a lot of libertarians on, and I think it's the first time in a while I've had somebody who wasn't a libertarian when it came down to those type of ideologies. But it is important, I think, to hear all aspects of the argument and debate and
Sure.
take in as much information as possible to help kind of mold your perspective. But he's an interesting guy because he it's funny because so many people that I agree with, when you hear, even though they might be completely different than somebody else I have on, when you have a discussion with them, a lot of times we're agreeing on a lot of the same things,
Yeah.
and it just, there's so many, like, we're all fighting for the same cause, it seems like, so,
Yeah.
So I think, in his aspect, or even like a libertarian's aspect, their perspective, a lot of times if you get people together and you talk about what's important and what really motivates them, a lot of the same things come up. And it reminds me of, I had this was a while ago, I had this journalist called Mariana Van Zeller on, and she did a bunch of stuff on Nat Geo and Travel Channel and all this stuff. She's actually a Portuguese journalist, and who did a bunch of shows in America, and she had a show called Breaking Borders, I believe, and I think I had her on right when that show was airing. And what they would do is she had like this world famous chef that would come with her to these places. For example, one place was to Texas, and what she would do is she would get somebody from both sides of the argument. She would get like a Mexican and a super patriotic Texan who dislikes Mexicans, and she basically sells them on this idea of like, hey, I'm going to sit you down. I got this world famous chef that's going to make you traditional food, whatever you guys want to eat, this amazing dinner, and all I ask is you guys to sit down at the dinner table and hang out. And they do. And it was amazing how, like, they, one, it's amazing how food brings people together. But I think the other thing was, like, when you sit them down and they're not there for the purpose of arguing or defending their team, and they're kind of just discussing and talking, they agree on a lot of stuff, and they have a lot in common. And I think that's the common theme you see with a lot of this stuff, is that we're constantly focusing on our differences for the it's about separating and conquering. It's like, get us all to fight amongst one another, and then the real enemies are the ones who are profiting and laughing and doesn't really give a shit about ideologies. I just had John Barber on, who's actually been on the Tinfoil Hat podcast and the Conspiracy Farm podcast and Night Frights and a bunch of stuff. But we were talking about the movie Network, and there's that. I don't know if you ever watched it from from I think early 70s, and he says in one of those scenes, it's like, there is no this or that or whatever. I forget what he uses, if he was talking about religion or ideologies, but he's like, there's only DuPont and there's only Monsanto or whatever corporations he was referring to. And he was talking about how, like, those ideologies don't mean shit, because it's like, if we do business together and we help each other in imperialism or power or money or whatever else is motivating us, I don't care if we disagree on ideologies or whatnot. So we're all fighting amongst one another's, I'm pro-Trump, I'm anti-Trump, I'm all this stuff. And at the end of the day, the war profiteers and the military industrial complex are still the ones pulling the strings and laughing while we're all fighting. I'm sorry, this show was supposed to be about you, and I just went on like a.
But I feel the same way. I mean, and it's funny because just getting back from Acapulco, you find that it's the same kind of thing. You've got a bunch of people that are. Might have different labels for themselves, but at their core, they all agree the control system is bullshit. They may debate who they want to lead them out of it, but we're all in agreement that the government is evil, that taxation is theft, that the military is running things, and that Israel is too far involved in American politics for anybody's liking. Those are sort of there might be more, but those are sort of four things that was pretty much in agreement, I think, with most of the people that were at the conference. So yeah, we're going to argue about some of the, red team versus blue team. At that Acapulco conference, they're in agreement that fuck both of them. I mean, neither team is working for your best interest at all. If they're part of that system, then it's broke. I mean, and it didn't even take a bunch of crazy anarchists to come up with that. You've got Ron Paul that spoke, and he broke it down in a way that, I mean, when you get a couple thousand anarchists to cheer for a 80-year-old white guy that spent 2 decades in politics as a Republican, I mean, he's clearly doing something right to get that crowd behind him, and they love him. They love him.
Well,
because he's just talking about like rational, common sense, logical things, and it seems like everyone is starving to hear that from some politician who actually recognizes it. And his assessment of the current situation was pretty hilarious. He was just like, I hope you guys don't get too excited about either side because they're all controlled. It doesn't matter what team you're on. He's like, I could only do so much before you come up against the brick wall.
Well, you look at it. I mean, another perfect example of how you can have completely different maybe ideologies, but you could have a lot in common. Him and Dennis Kucinich. I mean, they came together on a lot of stuff, a lot of the anti-war stuff, and were friends and helped each other out. And so, I mean, and one was a Democrat and one was a libertarian Republican, and so it shows you that we have a lot in common. And it's funny because I'm super anti-war, and I have plenty of anti-war people on, and you get people, I mean, some of the most outspoken anti-war people like Scott Horton, libertarian. Abby Martin is a kind of a socialist philosophy. So it's like, there's a lot that we can come together on and really help each other out on. And it's funny because you even though like somebody like James Corbett, who's been on the show a bunch of times, and a lot of people would see him as a kind of libertarian, anarcho-libertarian type of philosophy, but he will bash corporations as much as he does government. He does documentaries on Monsanto. He does documentaries on Bayer. He does tons of stuff on the corruption in corporations. So it's not like he's this capitalistic like corporate, it's only government, and he's blinded to the fact that like there's corrupt people and it's a corrupt system that's broken everywhere. Like he's honest about it. And same thing, like I had John Barber on and we were talking, and he seemed like, I forgot what we were talking about, but maybe socialism or whatnot. And then we started talking about how I'm like, well, socialism won't fix the issue, because we also talked about the military industrial complex, the CIA, all this stuff, which is going to be funded by the government. So like if we all agree these departments are the issue, then giving them more money is not going to help. And so I mean, even if you're a socialist and you agree that okay, we do have an issue with being constantly getting involved in other people's politics and all this stuff. I mean, this is all funded by the government. These, and obviously the private sector has a hand in it, but a lot of times they can influence what the government does because they want the wars, because they want, they want a profit. If you make bombs, you want to continue having justifications to make bombs. So that means continuing conflict. So it's all intertwined. I don't think it's one one thing or the other. I mean, and at the end of the day, like, I guess the bigger picture would be, is it really even a corporation issue or a political issue, or is it just a people issue? And in regards to, like, you get people who, there's always going to be people who are corrupt, and there's always going to be people who are motivated by, you know, or like, yeah, a lot of people, I'm sure, you know, you've read articles about how a lot of people in power have these psychopathic tendencies, or they have a lot of the same symptoms as psychopaths, and probably would be diagnosed as psychopaths. So you put those people anywhere and they're gonna do fucked up stuff. So I think that it's you know, it's not that corporations inherently might create somebody to be crazy or be psychopathic or do things that might be morally wrong, and I don't think governments necessarily do that too. I think you can you know, in some aspect, I guess, do that job and try to, I guess, be a morally good person. I think the problem with the system is that those people aren't the ones who succeed. We've created a system where the ones who succeed are the ones who say, fuck my moral compass, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get ahead. I'm going to do whatever it takes to rise up to the top. So we've created, like you said, we've created a system that's broken and almost needs to, and this is, I guess this goes back to the anarcho-libertarian type of philosophy, is that, like, yeah, you kind of do have to blow it all up and start all over. And I think that's what people really have to start considering, is the idea that the system we've created isn't possibly the only system that could work. Like, if we, you know, if you believe in infinite universes and infinite planets, and, you know, there could be other similar planets in some far universe with people, like, they might, you know, eventually evolve, and they might have a completely different system. They might come up, you know, come up with a completely different idea on how a economy should work, or a civilization should work, or maybe they don't even have an economy. Who knows? You know, maybe it's more like hunter-gatherers. You know, but we have to consider the fact that the system we have we don't have to be stuck in this, and or just because even when Ron Paul was running, it was like, I remember having discussions with people, and they're like, "Oh, his ideas are too radical." I'm like, this is your problem. I'm like, to the person I was talking to, I'm like, your problem is that you want more of the same. I'm like, so you're so afraid of doing something that seems different than what we have, that we're just going to constantly keep voting in somebody who just slightly different and not really that different. So we just stay in this cycle of kind of doing the same thing over and over again. I'm like, we need somebody who's radically different, you know? For sure. And I think when Bernie and Trump were running last time, the reason why they were so popular was because of that, because people were like, I don't give a shit if these are the perfect candidates. I just want something different. And they seem like the most different out of my options. So this is why, you know, I think they got a lot of attention.
Yeah, and when we start recording, I'll play. When we talk about.
I've been recording, so we can just keep talking.
Okay, great. well, at Anarchapulco, what James Corbett's talk was about was called, I forget what the exact name was. I think it was The Church of the State. And in typical awesome James Corbett fashion, he walked in, not from behind the stage, but down the aisle, dressed as a priest, flogging himself with his notes and mumbling in fake Latin. Every now and then he would mumble, CorbettReport.com, you know, and smash himself. And then he got up and did led this fake prayer ceremony with the words on the screen behind him, and it was, I forget the exact words, but it ended with, and if you don't like it, then move to Somalia. You know, it was about anarchy and things like that, and his whole presentation was about how we've taken we're sort of part, maybe not the anarchist crowd there, but in general, society has become regardless of what religion you're a part of, you are a part of the religion of the state. And he was talking about statism and how we get so wrapped up in this identity of our country and our state, and how it has to be this way because that's just the way we've always thought of things. And he brought in interesting perspectives of how the state, you know, over hundreds, if not thousands of years, has systematically worked to destroy humanity and the people that, and we worship it. We worship the state as it's simultaneously destroying us and working against our best interest and things like that. And if you challenge that, then you're a heretic, and how dare you? And kind of like what Hitler said, if you just label somebody as being unpatriotic and opening up society to the potential for attackers to come in and denounce them as unpatriotic, and then that'll just take care of them. And we saw that, of course, in 2003 with the lead up to the Iraq War, when the Dixie Chicks came out and said that they were embarrassed to be from Texas because that's where George W. was from. And society just tarred and feathered them for how dare you be so unpatriotic as to not support our president. And that's just brainwashing, just straight up brainwashing. And of course they were right. The Dixie Chicks were right. It was an embarrassment, regardless of whether he was from Texas. He's an American president making up lies. And I don't for a second believe that George W. Bush was capable of making up the lies, but I should say repeating the lies that were given to him that would be used as a pretext to kick off this war on terror, or war of terror, to be more specific. And how, there was just, you remember there were American flags on the sides of windows of cars, and everyone was just
Freedom
like,
prize.
we're going to get them. And, if we don't get them there, they're going to come here, and all that bullshit. No, no honest debate about that. Really, the Iraqis, who had zero to do with 9/11, are going to forget about all their problems at home. They're going to launch an invasion across the Atlantic to get the United. It's preposterous. But people were really drinking the Kool-Aid, and they were really into it, and they were really, cheerleaders of the state and cheerleaders of these wars. And it's like, hang on a second, let's take a step back and analyze this. What are we doing? We're going into Afghanistan because they had hijackers on the planes? I'm sorry. They all had Saudi passports. Okay, well, we'll take that out. Well, we got to get them because Osama bin Laden was from there. Well, yeah, but he's also a Saudi with and he worked for the CIA. What are we doing? This, how come the plans were so, figured out so soon? Well, they were sitting on George W.'s desk on September 4th, 2001, for the invasion of Afghanistan. Plans were there a week before 9/11. So what are we really doing? And I've been pretty outspoken about the role of the media as being one of the worst components of our society. We love... we love to turn on TV and watch, mindless shows and or documentaries or, TV series or whatever. But when it comes to the news, we somehow pretend that all that fiction that we see the rest of the time is that, that this is real. Okay, the news is actually the real part of television. Everything else is sort of, fictional stories or made up TV shows or movies or whatever. But the news is real. But the news is as fake as any of the other stuff on TV. We just have been the last people to know it. And it's so dangerous because we go out about our lives assuming that, well, maybe not us after waking up to this reality, but the vast majority of people watch their news for 30 minutes. They think they've got all the information that they need, and then they go out into the world and then they start arguing with people. My team's better than the red team is better than the blue team, and blah blah blah. And it just depends on where you're getting your news from. If you're watching CNN, you've got one version of reality. If you're watching Fox, you've got another version of reality. Meanwhile, none of them are even close to actual reality. It's just some hybrid version of the truth. And it's crazy that people are still down in this paradigm of arguing about whose politician is better. Hillary Clinton is going to be better than Donald Trump. Let's just be honest. If those are your two choices, we've got a problem. And now here we go into this new election of 2020, which seems like it's been going on already for 3 years, although, it's just a colossal waste of time and energy. And all these people want to fight each other online about whether Bernie Sanders is going to be the one. It's like, none of this matters. they're down here. They're the puppets. Look for the people above them pulling the strings. That's what really matters. And going to Anarchapulco, this was the second time I had gone. It's so refreshing because what you realize is that you are surrounded by a bunch of like-minded people, and their core values are they just want to be left alone. They don't want the state bothering them. Anarchy doesn't mean no rules. It means no rulers. I think we could all agree on, based on the current batch of rulers that we have, anything's got to be better than what we've currently got. And so anyway, I've enjoyed going the last couple times. It's I've been able to speak there just frankly just so that I could hear other people speak. As soon as I'm done with my talk, I always feel like a kid that just finished up their finals and is on summer break, and now I get to go watch James Corbett or Richard Gage or Ron Paul or whoever go up there and speak. And it's just I highly recommend it for people, especially also since you can get out of wherever you are. I was coming from Denver where there was like 2 feet of snow on the ground, and to be able to go to Acapulco, Mexico for a week is, there's worse places to go.
Yeah, absolutely. It was funny because I remember after you emailed me, I was telling my wife, I'm like, hey, you want to go to Mexico next year around this time? And she's like, yeah, but why? Why are you asking? And I told her, and I'm like, we could make a little vacation out of it or whatever. And so we've been meaning to go down there for a while because we have a lot of close friends that go to Mexico all the time, and they're just like, you gotta go. So I'm like, it would be a good reason to finally book it and go. But I went to the Red Pill Expo in Hartford this year because I live in Massachusetts, not near the Springfield area, so not too far from Hartford in Connecticut. So and it's awesome just to be around people that are like that. Like you said, you kind of feel like you're in a bubble until you go to one of these events, and then you realize, holy shit, there's like a lot of people who feel the same way I do and think the way I do. And I think that's why podcasts have become so popular too, because a lot of people just like the fact that they can hear the type of discussions they wish they were having. They can hear the type of ideas and stories that they find important. And I think, that's why it really kind of blew up. And I know that's why I got into them, because the conversations and the ideas and the discussions that were happening on podcasts weren't the same ones that I could have with my friends. They weren't as intrigued with these topics, or they just don't care or whatever. So I just felt like, I was living through other people where I'm like, oh shit, I feel like I'm just one of the guys hanging out, hearing this conversation. We're at a pub having a drink or whatnot.
Right.
So I think people really like that aspect of it. For people who are listening and might not know, about Anarchapulco, can you give like just a brief description of what it is, how long it's been going on, and what the event's about? Yeah, so there's 2 components to it. The first part is the Dollar Vigilante Summit. That's 2 days. That's the Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Anarchapulco is Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I would describe Anarchapulco as sort of like a 3-legged stool. You've got anarchy. It's sort of an anarchist convention, so people that are sort of anti-state, pro-freedom. You have cryptocurrency component. There's a lot of people talking about crypto. In fact, that has its own stage called Cryptopulco. And the third component would be health and wellness. So you've got a bunch of people you've got Del Bigtree from the director of Vax there. You've got people that, Clive DeCarl, a lot of people that are doing unschooling programs, so helping you transition out of the school system and into the homeschooling programs and things like that. So what it is you get this little packet with a schedule, and it shows who's speaking on the various different stages, and you just kind of look at it and you map out your day based on, I want to go to the main stage and hear Ron Paul. I want to go over here and hear Luke Radowski talk. It's the Super Bowl of alternative media, that's for sure. And it's put on by Jeff Berwick, who started a company called the Dollar Vigilante and now the Crypto Vigilante. He has a podcast called the Anarchast, and he has done Acapulco for, I think this was the 6th year of it. Oh, wow.
And he lives in Acapulco, Mexico, and he and I have written a book together that should be coming out pretty soon. And so I spoke last year at Dollar Vigilante Summit about real estate, which is my area of expertise. And then this last year, I spoke about the book that we have coming out pretty soon that's tentatively titled The Controlled Demolition of the American Empire. I talked a little bit about that and why we wrote it, what the sort of chapter breakdown is about, and gave people a summary about that. But what's great about it is you can do these events. You can take your kids too, because they have a kids section where there's not just babysitters, but they're also doing really fun activities. The hotel is right on the beach, so you've got pools and beach and all this good stuff. And they have a concert. First night, they had a rapper, R.A. the Rugged Man. He did a performance at this nightclub, which was really a lot of fun. I actually I found out who he was from Tinfoil Hat, watching him on Sam's show. And anyway, he performed. It's great. They do things like, my impression or my assumption before I went the first year was that it was going to be like Molotov cocktails and burning tires and black bandana wearing, anarchist, or it was going to look like a Grateful Dead concert parking lot or something like that. I just had sort of like this vision of anarchists as being a little bit on the fringe. And what I found was that there were some of the Grateful Dead looking people for sure. But it was like people in their 20s all the way to their 70s, a lot of retired couples, a lot of people looking to figure out how to manage their money. There were a lot of financial analysts and people that had ties to the financial world that had left, that understood how criminal central banking was. But the vibe is phenomenal. And like, as an example, on the Friday night, so the second night of in Acapulco, all the buses show up to the front of the lobby of the hotel. And anyone that wants to get in, I think it's $20 to get on the bus. And what you do is they take you to a nature preserve not too far away, and you release baby sea turtles into the ocean at night. So, pretty far away from Molotov cocktails. So this was the type of, and of course, phenomenal speakers there, and guys like James Corbett and Benny Wills from Joy Camp. He was the host, the MC this year. He's such a good dude, and you can hear you can find out you can educate yourself on a lot of things. And the people that you've been watching online for years and years and years, they're probably there. If they're not there this year, they were there the year before, or maybe they're going to be there the next year. David Icke was a speaker last year. I talked to Graham Hancock about coming out. He said he'd like to do it for 2021. Couldn't make it this year. So, and I have no official ties to the program at all. I just know Jeff, of course, and had a great time the last couple of years, so I don't mind talking about it in a positive way, because you leave there feeling, actually you kind of leave feeling a little bit let down, because you're like, oh, that's gone, that's in the past now I have to go back to my real life, and it can be a little bit of a letdown. But every time I go, I wind up with a stack of business cards. There's a lot of networking going on there. There's interesting people doing cool stuff, and there's guys that are like building these prefab houses that float out in the ocean, where you can like live out in the ocean. Crazy stuff. There are people that teach you how to get multiple passports from different countries, or setting up residency in different countries through their projects that were frankly quite affordable. I was a little bit surprised. So there's a lot of interesting conversations being had there, not just in the hall where they're speaking, but after it's done and late at night. I wound up in a conversation with Richard Gage from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth till 3:00 in the morning at the main lobby bar. We're just talking about stuff like that. These, in the year before, same thing, but with Ole Damagard talking about Operation Gladio. So these are the kind of crazy conversations that you can actually wind up having if you go to these events and you just kind of walk around the bar. You're like, oh, hey, there's David Icke over there having a beer. So it's interesting to be around these people, but there's no layer of separation between you and the speakers. Everyone is there just as approachable as anybody that you would, if you'd see him in the airport. Freeway Rick Ross spoke this year. He was the largest cocaine trafficker in the 80s, and
I've had him on the show.
He and I chatted for a while. Actually, we were on the same plane out at Houston, and spoke at the airport for a while.
Did he try to sell you any cocaine? No.
What's that?
Did he try to sell you any cocaine?
No, but I did have to go through TSA on our way back then. We had to go clear customs in Houston. And I was thinking, man, if I get the full body cavity search, I wonder what this guy's getting. He did 13 years in a federal prison on a life sentence with no possibility of parole for trafficking so much cocaine that he screwed up the tips of his fingers from counting so much. He said he was at the height of it. He was making $3 million a day.
Yeah, he's been on he's been on my show, and the interesting thing about Rick Ross is how his story ties into obviously Gary Webb and Meta Arkansas and all that stuff. So it's it's super fascinating because everybody knows him as the drug trafficker. But, there's other aspects to it that makes it really interesting because the whole Iran-Contras and the Nicaraguan ties and all that stuff. And that's one of the reasons why he became so big was because he was getting that cocaine so cheap and he didn't ask questions and he was getting it cheap because the government was bringing it in and then, basically sharing the profits.
See, even the government, they even subsidize things when they get in the cocaine business, too. They even screw that up.
Well, how crazy is it that literally, he gets a lot of the credit for Ready Rock and the crack epidemic, and it was cocaine that the government was flying in that literally caused a crack epidemic. So it's just like, and then they're locking people up for it. So it's wild. But so that's it sounds very similar to the Red Pill Expo, which the host of Joy Camp actually hosted too, and he's witty, he's well spoken, he's funny, he's full of energy. He's the perfect person to host one of these shows.
For sure. In fact, I was at Anarchapulco last year talking to Benny when G. Edward Griffin came up. He is the founder of Red Pill Expo.
Yep.
And I was just kind of standing back, not really saying much, letting them talk to one another. And that's when he made him the offer. He says, hey, you want to host Red Pill Expo? I was like, oh, that'd be great. That should be great. And Benny's like, yeah, I'll do it for sure. And so they put that together. But you want to talk about kind of the strange way the universe works, not to get too woo-woo, but I was at Benny Will's wedding in October. It was in Washington. I flew in from Denver to see it. I didn't know anybody that was going to be there. But I get seated at dinner next to Richard Gage from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And I say to him, you're in my book. And he was like, oh, really? And I said, no, let me rephrase that. There is a chapter in my book that is called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. That's how much you're in my book. He was like, wow, really? So I wound up talking to him for 2 hours at the wedding. And then I said, have you ever heard of Anarchapulco? No. I said, do you know who Jeff Berwick is? Yeah, I know who Jeff is. I said, well, I think you need to speak at this event. So when I got back home, I sent Jeff an email. I said, you should really have Richard Gage speak. And he says, oh, that's a great idea. And next thing you know, he's there speaking. So I felt like, the universe sort of put that situation together. And Benny's going to be hosting the next Red Pill Expo, which is this June, I think 5th and 6th at Jekyll Island, of all places, which is a perfect location. I was just talking to John Snyson, who is one of the he works with Ed Griffin about for the Red Pill Expo, and he was saying it's gonna be so awesome because we're going back to where it all started. And I was like, oh, what a great location for this. This is gonna be phenomenal.
Yeah, so. And that was the book that a lot of us. I mean, I got familiar with Griffin's work based on that book. So that's wild.
Yeah, and he's still going strong. I mean, he spoke last year at Anarchapulco, and I'm fascinated by it. He's in it. He's got to be in his 80s. Still, that's the thing though. When you wake up to the fraud and how the system is intentionally rigged against us, you can't go back to, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to sleep. It's the red pill. It's the perfect name for his event. But you see him, he's in his 80s, and it's like, he burned his boat a long time ago. He's crossed over, he's awake, and he realizes what's going on. And then you just kind of feel like an obligation that you have to try and expose people. I understand now, I'm not religious, but I kind of understand how religious people, once they come into their religion, they get very enthusiastic about it and they want to share it with everybody else because it's had such a positive impact on them. So they feel, I want other people to feel this positive thing. I understand that, because I feel the same way with regard to some of these when you wake up to the situation that you realize that the media is working against you, your government's working against you, that banking, the system of fractional reserve banking is totally corrupt. It's a gigantic Ponzi scheme that's about to collapse. That the wars that we start around the world are total bullshit. Once you wake up to that and you realize it's all lies, you feel like this obligation to explain this to everybody else. And so these conferences are I think, there's more of them kind of sprouting up, but they're growing, and the size of the audience is growing because people are thirsty for this knowledge. They want to get out there. They want to be around like-minded people. They want to, they know a lot, but they want to know even more. I've just been really impressed with the crowds at these events that I've gone to, and I think I'll go to this Red Pill this year. I'm excited. I'm almost positive I'm going to go to it because I like being around. I like being around that crowd. When I left in Acapulco last year, I had this realization that, like, these are my people. These are like the people that I want to be around. They're nice to each other. They don't have it all figured out, but everyone's kind of working. Everyone's bringing a little bit of information to the table, and the conversations, like I said, the conversations at night at the bar and everything are crazy. I mean, in a good way, but it's just people kind of rotating in and out through your table. And if one person wants to come over, and I've met artists there, and I've met crypto people, and I don't know much about crypto, but I'm able to learn a little bit about it. And met guys that used to work for the Federal Reserve, and other people that have been, that have written books. One guy that wrote a book and handed it in. He took a stack of books to the White House and gave it to the Secret Service. It was an anti-government book. He gave it to him, thought it was funny. They put flashlights, looked around in his car, found a couple bullets that he had in his cup holder that were from, like, going to the gun range, months earlier. He didn't realize it. Dragged him out of his car, arrested him, and now he's looking at, I think he said he was looking at 10 years, 15 years in prison for this crazy stuff. So you get these guys that are telling these insane stories. And I just think it's whether you can get to Acapulco for this or whether you can get to Red Pill Expo, I just think that making that journey will make you feel a lot better. One of the things one of the common themes is that I've met a lot of people that are from the South. There's one guy that I did the peyote ceremony with is from Alabama, and he's been coming for, I think, four years in a row. And I said, why do you keep coming? He said, because I can't talk to anybody at home. I don't have any friends that are into this sort of stuff. And when I come here, I feel like I've got a bunch of friends, and I felt kind of the same way. I feel like it can be a bit lonely for some of us out there on an island where you can't talk to your family about these things. You definitely can't talk to some of your friends or your neighbors, and to feel like to know that there is a community of people that think like you and kind of act like you. It recharges your batteries a little bit, gives you a little bit of hope, and you go, okay, all right, it's not, all right, there are more people. There's got to be more people out there like me, because I see the number of views on these videos, and there's thousands of them. So I gotta imagine they're out there somewhere. But to come to these conferences and actually meet them and network and do all that good, it's phenomenal. I highly recommend it for anybody. Like I said, I don't have any stake in this. It just except that I had a good experience, and I think that other people. I mean, obviously, if people are watching your show or listening to your show, they're in that world already, right? They probably will feel the same way. So, and get out of the house, go on a vacation, plan your vacation to coincide with something like this, and come back with a education. I kind of joke that, like, my wife didn't come on these trips with me because she's got her own work trips to go to, but she thinks I'm out of my mind because I'll do the ayahuasca ceremony. I'll sign up for that. And she's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, listen, you want to go to, we go to a resort, you'll go to the spa, right? I'm not into that. I want to just go to another dimension for a couple hours and see what's going on over there. So you can sign up for these. And they had like legit shaman come in. I did the ayahuasca ceremony and the DMT ceremony last year. And this year I did the peyote ceremony and the DMT ceremony again this year. And it's fascinating. So there's all these little a la carte items that you can add on to your experience. You can sign up for workshops that'll teach you how to get secondary passports and things like that. Or you can meet with financial planners like Tim Pashot, who's got Liberty Advisors, and he'll show you how to manage your IRA and put it into crypto if you want to do that. All these like really fascinating people doing interesting things. To be honest with you, there's almost too much to do. You wind up having to make choices of like, oh, I got to see this guy, but I really want to see that guy too. And anyway, it's a good problem to have. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it sounds like a Warped Tour, or Ozfest back in the day. It's like you had all these stages, you had your map, and you're like, oh.
It's Lollapalooza for the alternative media.
Yeah.
Just see what your favorite bands are.
Well, it is inspiring. When I remember when I went to the Red Pill Expo, and my wife was working all weekend, and I ended up spending all day Saturday down there. I believe that was just about it because I had to watch the little ones. But it was you do leave inspired. You feel it. I remember growing up when I was playing music, and anytime I went to a concert, the first thing I wanted to do was go home and write music because I was inspired by the whole experience, the whole situation. And kind of similar type thing. It's like you see all these people doing cool stuff. The first thing you want to do when you get back home is like, oh, let me pop out a podcast, or in your case, maybe let me start preparing for my next book, or right. Whatever it may be. And you do get inspired. So I think it's definitely awesome. One thing I do worry a little bit in regards to at least my personal experiences with some of these events is that you can get caught up with the positive energy that I'm like, I wonder if I can get stuck in this like almost cult type of thinking where it's just like, because everybody is so pro these ideas and these thoughts, and the energy is so positive, and it feels good to be pro these ideas together and rooting for these people, then am I really being, I guess, honest in regards to like, am I really buying into this, what they're saying because of the experience, or am I buying into it because it makes the most sense? Do you ever think like that?
There were a couple guys there. There was one guy in particular at the event that I watched him walk around. He was a total douchebag, just unmitigated prick. And I said to one of the guys I was with that that guy looks like he wants to go start his own cult. You know what I mean? He just had that sort of Jesus-y kind of vibe to him. He was dressed kind of like with the flowing clothes and like the big man bun, like dreadlocked man bun and everything. And he just thought he was such hot shit. And he wound up getting into a fight with Jeff Berwick later that night at the nightclub, which was a totally crazy story in and of itself. So it's funny that you say that, because I did get a sense that there might be some people that could really get into it to the point where they want to follow one of the leaders off and go create this utopian society. Good for you. If that's what you want to do, I get it. I understand. There's a lot of people that actually relocated to Acapulco. They're sort of taking up, there's a nice little community, anarchist community vibe going on there. I'm not obviously prepared to make that leap at this point in my life, and I don't think many people are. I mean, we've got like families and kids and all of these other things that we, real life, so to speak, you have to get home to. But you can still drag some of the information that you got, or the lessons that you learned, or the vibe that you have. You can drag that back in and incorporate it into your real life without feeling like you're, going to sell everything and go, buy a Volkswagen van and move to Mexico and live out of your car or anything like that. I mean, I don't think you need to go down that path, but anytime you get a bunch of free thinkers that are looking for answers, you have to be careful of who is there providing the answers, or what answers they're providing. So I felt like the vibe overall, because of such a diverse group of speakers talking about some really interesting thing. Nobody was too heavy on any one aspect. There was no, let's go, burn all of our U.S. dollars and fuck the system and all that stuff. I mean, there's kind of talk of that, but really, I felt like it was just, there were a lot of people just taking notes and sort of trying to, hear different sides. Del Bigtree, for one, is great. When he goes on there and talks about the anti-vaccine issue, he's a professional television producer, movie producer, writer. He's a legitimate guy who's up there dressed nice. He's not twirling in the parking lot or, walking up on stage with a lit joint in his hand. I mean, there's some people that are very serious about what they do, and there are some people that were not very serious about what they do too. But you've got professionals up there too, and so it's kind of nice to get that a little bit of a vibe of the professional component of it. Like I said, like Richard Gage, when he goes up and talks about 9/11 and the World Trade Centers, coming down, he's in a suit, because he's an architect, who's been doing it for 30 years, and he brings this professionalism. So part of that is actually kind of nice to have, to show that you don't have to be just a dirty hippie to be into this stuff. You can be a professional person and come out of the professional world and still work in the professional world, but connect with this audience in a way that is very meaningful. In fact, I think that those guys had probably the biggest impact. Ron Paul, Richard Gage, Del Bigtree. Those guys are if I had to explain to my in-laws, if I had to say, what is Anarchapulco all about, and have them, it's an anarchist convention. The first three people that I would have them listen to would be them, because they have this sort of credibility from the professional world that they bring to these events, and it can ease somebody into it, and they see Ron Paul and they go, okay, I know who he is. He's a legit guy. And then you see, well, Richard Gage has got all this background, 30 years of as an architect, and he's still doing his thing, and he looks professional. And Del Bigtree, same thing, he knows his stuff. He's obviously done. So you can go, oh, okay, well, these guys aren't the anarchists that I thought they were going to be. These aren't like I said, they're not dirty hippies. They're coming up saying, hey man, peace and love and all that stuff. Because I think people that are on the, like, as James would describe them, normies, right? Normie people. I think they hear that twirly hippie stuff and they just tune it out immediately. But you can't tune out Ron Paul and you can't tune out Richard Gage and Del Bigtree, because they're making too much sense in a very professional way that you go, okay, well, if these guys are talking about some truthful things at this event, then maybe it's reasonable for me to listen to the next batch of speakers. And they're a little bit more on the fringe, but I like the first group and maybe I like the second group. And so there's just a broad selection of people to choose from. I mean, you can listen to guys that know a ton about crypto, and that could be your whole experience there. But you'd be missing it if you didn't mix in the health and wellness component to it as well. Because one of the things I think we've kind of all understand as we get to this point is that you've got to incorporate a couple different things. I mean, awareness that the media is lying to you, got to have that. Understanding that the government is lying to you, that's important to have too. But you got to take care of yourself. You have to be careful about when you realize that the media is lying to you, you're taking that information and you have to be careful about what information you're putting into your brain. So then you also realize, well, I have to be careful about what food I'm putting into my body as well. And so, of course, there's the health and wellness component to that. And we've all talked about Monsanto and how they're making GMO foods and all this stuff. Well, it's nice to hear that, have some people explain to you, this is how you can get around that. This is how you can sidestep the system. And by the way, you need to, because if you learn everything there is to know about central banking, but you're going home and you're filling your head with corporate media, television news, and then you're having dinner with, eating GMO vegetables, like, how good are you going to be? You got to sort of incorporate it all into it. And so that's why I thought it was smart of them when they came up with the format for this conference to mix in that health and wellness component too, because you got to take care of your body and your brain. If you're going to fight the system, if you're going to be this anarchist, you've got to kind of make it a 360-degree change, like everything about you, kind of improve your mental state, improve the information that you take in, improve the food that you take in, and it's all helpful, I think.
Yeah, well, one thing I love about Richard and Del, and they both have been on the show, is that they both are talking about probably two of the most taboo topics. One is vaccines, and one is 9/11. But yet you have the representatives of those topics be kind of the most professional, like you said, looking and sounding people. So you could send them a interview with Del Bigtree, or you could send them an interview with Richard Gage, and they sound professional. They sound like they make sense. They look professional. They don't look like two crazy people who are like, ooh, I read this stuff on Facebook and, whatever, like, and I think that helps the movement a lot. And that really helps with kind of getting people to listen a little bit, because I think those are two topics that are very hard to spark conversations with. I have two little ones, completely unvaccinated. And, when people find out, they lose their fucking minds. They're just like, wait, you didn't vaccinate your kids? I'm like, look at my kids. It's like I'm always getting compliments about how healthy they are. Oh, your kids are never sick. And the second I say that they're not vaccinated, people are like, why not? I'm like, you just told me that your kid's always sick and my kid's not. Now you're asking me why. I'm like, why is your kid vaccinated? Because obviously it's not working, So
right.
It's
but you've got to if you've got a guy like Del talking about it. There's something to be said for looking professional. There's something to be said for that, for just on a visual. I mean, why do news anchors dress with suit and tie? It's to convey this sense of authority. And if Del Bigtree was doing his presentations in a tank top and flip flops, the information would still be good, but you might subconsciously be discounting what he's saying. And so I think it's important for these particular people that are talking about some very polarizing issues to not give the opposing side anything to pick them apart at from a credibility standpoint. Just let them argue the facts, which is important to do. Don't let them try and say, well, dismiss somebody for being oh, well, that guy's just an anarchist, or that guy's just a whatever label they want to put on you, or that, so and in fact, I had that talk with Richard at one night. I was saying that I thought it was smart that he, we're having this conversation at the bar, and he's in a, shorts and flip-flops and everything, but his presentation, he was dressed up. And I said, I thought that was smart of you to do that. I think it's important for you to maintain that because you don't want to give anyone any sort of stupid little reason to be dismissive of what you're saying, because the information is so powerful. The information is so unbelievable that, I would challenge somebody, not that you need to do this at an Acapulco because everyone's sort of on board, but I would challenge somebody that is a 9/11 official story believer. Like, come with me, sit down for 1 hour and listen to Richard Gage's presentation about Building 7, which, by the way, you probably haven't even heard of. You give me 1 hour and I will change, this presentation will change your life. It will change. But that, of course, I think some people fear that might actually be the case, that, okay, I don't want to hear that presentation because it will change my life. And what am I going to do about it? And now you've screwed my head up. You've made me think that 9/11 didn't happen the way that it actually, that we're told it happened. And if that's the case, then I have to reevaluate the way my relationship with the media and my relationship with the government. And why did we start these wars? And it opens up this huge can that I think a lot of people don't really want to. It's obviously the cognitive dissonance, but it becomes sort of like, well, what am I going to do about it? I mean, yeah, all this stuff is true, but like, I don't even need to fill my head with it because my priorities are, I got to get up, I got to go to work, I got to take care of my kids, I got to come home and make dinner, and I got to do it all over again tomorrow. If I have to worry about trying to sort out 9/11, like that takes away from me being able to do these other things that are priorities. And what am I going to do to change it? I can understand how people think that. I don't respect it, but I can understand it. I understand why people feel that way. But I also feel like, awareness of these things is crucial because nothing changes if we remain ignorant of it. And you and I don't have it all figured out. I mean, we're still learning new things all the time. You got new people on, and I'm talking to new people. I'm learning something that I didn't know before, and that's great. And nobody expects us to have it all figured out. But I think at least a desire to figure some of it out so that either, I mean, you can look at it this way, a desire to figure out how the world really works just so that you don't put your kids in that same trap in the future. That could be enough of a reason for someone to, the reason why you want to figure these topics out, why you want to get into 9/11. I don't know. You're right. You can't change the past. But maybe you can be aware of it so that the next time someone tries to pull something like this, you recognize the signs and we collectively stand up and say, no, we're not doing this again. And one of the things I have learned, and I think you know this too, is that when it comes to like government-backed terror, they run a very small playbook. They don't change it very much. They run the same plays kind of over and over again. False flags happen because they're very effective. They're simple. They work really well. And so they'll run these plays over and over again until we recognize them and put a stop to it. So so awareness of these situations is the first step. But God, I can understand it's a hard step to take for a lot of people because by doing so, by acknowledging that you have got a problem with, say, the official story of 9/11, is to come to an understanding that the people that sold you the story were probably in on it. And if they're in on it, what else are they in on? And that opens up a can of worms that is a lot to deal with for people.
Well, they say it's easier to trick somebody than convince them they've been tricked. And I think that's the hard thing is they have a view on, what their reality is, on how the world works. And then when you start when that starts decaying because you're having these long conversations with them or you're exposing them to information they weren't aware of, I mean, your first reaction is to almost push back, be like, no, that's not true, because it's because it's basically saying like what you're saying is I'm wrong, or my worldview is wrong, or I don't get it, I don't understand it. And nobody wants to be told that they don't understand something or they don't get something or that they have something all wrong. And I think, the ego will get in the way sometimes and be like, but I think one thing I've learned from just my past experiences is that as hard as it is to have those type of conversations because people will push back, sometimes a little bit of it kind of seeps through, and a year later or 6 months later you end up having a conversation with them and you're like, wait, this isn't the same person I debated with or had a little disagreement with some months ago. Like they're starting to kind of change their perspective, and so you never know what sticks with them, and maybe when they go home, maybe later that day they go on online and they research some things you brought up, and you have no idea what's having an impact. So I think but it is hard because so many times when you're having a discussion with somebody that has drastically different perspectives or believes everything that the government tells you or the media tells you. I mean, I've had both where I've had these long discussions and I feel like maybe I got through to them, and then I have times where I'm just like, I wasted all that fucking energy for nothing because I'm never going to get through to this person, so. Yeah.
Well, my book, my first book, The Octopus of Global Control, came out of busted Thanksgiving dinner that I had with my in-laws years ago, where I brought up 9/11 at a Thanksgiving dinner and watched the table turn on me. And what I realized is that there's first of all, I didn't have my facts straight. And that's a big thing. Second of all, people don't like to be told. I had to learn this the hard way, that if you say, this is what happened, and you just tell it, you lay it out, it's not as effective as doing it a different way, which is to say, hey, what do you think caused Building 7 to come down to someone? And they'll say, what is Building 7? Maybe. Or if they know, they'll say, well, fires. And you say, yeah, but did you notice how it came down symmetrically? That seems pretty unusual for fires to do that, don't you think? Have you ever seen that happen with a fire? And so if you phrase it in a way where you're asking them to participate in the investigation with you, say, hey, what do you think about this? It doesn't always work, but it works a whole lot better than saying, you're wrong, I'm right, it happened like this, you're stupid, because then, like you said, your ego gets involved and people get defensive and they're like, I don't want to participate in this conversation. But like I said, like you said with that, which is you had a conversation with somebody, it didn't really go well, and then the next time you had a conversation, you felt like you cracked their armor a little bit. I had that after that Thanksgiving dinner. Couple months later, the father-in-law said to me, he was asking about his son, who was the one who was on my side for it, but everyone else was against us. He said, what do you think about what he says about this other stuff? He's crazy, right? And I said, no, I think he's the most sane guy in your family. I think he really. And so then when I sort of had his back on this crazy topics that the son had been bringing up with the dad, because I sort of had his back too, it made him stop for a second and go, there was now two of us that were believing this weird conspiracy theory, right? And that made him kind of stop for a second and examine it. And I'm no longer married into that family, so I don't know exactly what their thoughts are on this. But my guess is that the dad is a lot more open to these things now after having years of kind of, having these conversations, and maybe some more and more people having his sons back in this. But it was interesting to watch that conversation because the son was totally awake. He knew exactly what was going on. I mean, he knew. He had a pretty good idea of what was going on, and the dad was very, like most people, he was very into the status quo, the official story, all that stuff. He had no reason to challenge it, never thought to challenge it or anything like that. And to watch that relationship kind of watch them come a little bit closer together was fascinating. And it takes time, and some people wake up to it, and some people never do, and that's just kind of the reality of things. But my point is, don't bring up 9/11 at Thanksgiving dinner unless you want to have a very uncomfortable dessert. Yeah. That's one of those things that was sort of tough. I also realized from that conversation and what led to the format of my book, which is, in the book I brought in quotes from over 500 different people that had some sort of role in some important events in our history, either, so like Rothschilds and Rockefellers and Clintons and Bushes and all those people that you would expect, but also guys like George Carlin and Bill Hicks and Joe Rogan and guys that see the world, comedians that see it a little differently. And what I was, from that Thanksgiving dinner that went wrong, what I realized was that I'm talking to them about 9/11, and they're looking at me and they're saying, you have no authority, you have no expertise on this subject, which was true. But what I wanted to say was, well, what if you heard the words from Richard Gage? What if Richard Gage was with me at that dinner and he was able to explain to you as an architect how it's mathematically impossible for this to happen? Would it matter? Would that change your mind? And the answer is, well, it would help. Or what if you think I'm crazy for talking about the New World Order, right? What if I showed you where George H.W. Bush mentioned New World Order over 200 times in his 4 years in office? Plus, the Queen has talked about it. Plus, the Pope has talked about it. Would you think that I could take my tinfoil hat off a little bit? Like, it's not my words, it's them. And so what I realized was that a lot of the people just had never heard they'd never heard the words of David Rockefeller thanking the media members at Bilderberg in 1991 for keeping their mouths shut, for saying thank you for upholding your end of the bargain to remain silent about this. Without your help, we would not be able to put our one world government plans into place. Like, would that change your mind about the plan for a new world order? Because you're never going to hear that on your nightly news, but he said it. And so what I realized was that it wasn't even about me. It wasn't about my opinions on these things. My opinions had no value to them. But these other people that they knew, that they recognized and respected maybe, to hear their words talk about it, to hear oh, you know who Henry Kissinger is? Oh, yeah, he's great. He was, involved in all this stuff. Really? Well, did you know that he considers everyone in Africa to be useless eaters? Do you know that he's been vocal about saying how he wants to reduce the population by 50%? To which I responded, that sounds great. Let's start by cutting him in half. So, there's a lot of these people are out there talking about their plan, and it gets lost in the sea of information out there. And so what I wanted to do was to grab it all, put it all together in one book, so that if I'm talking about the plan for a new world order, I could bring in, instead of footnotes, I could bring in quotes from these people and say, this is them talking. It's not my term. I didn't invent this. This is them talking about their plans. This is what they call it. They call it a new world order. They talk about how they want it. David Rockefeller mentioned it on page 405 of his autobiography, where he says, if the claim is that people have claimed that me and my family are internationalists looking to create a one world government to control humanity, if those are the charges, then I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it. Would it matter if you heard David fucking Rockefeller mention it in his autobiography that he wants to put a one world government together? So, all these things I felt like bolstered my argument, but it wasn't really my words. It was their words talking about it. Because one thing I think we've all kind of come to understand, and it's a weird component of this, is that they'll tell you what they're going to do. You just need to listen to them. And so much of it we either don't hear or we dismiss or whatever, but they're talking about the plan. I don't know if this is some sort of cosmic or karmic rule that they follow, where they have to tell you what they're going to do before they do it. I think that's part of what it is. But for whatever reason, they tell you what they're doing before they do it. We just have to be attuned enough to listen to it and trust and believe what they say when they say it.
Well, you look at PNAC, you look at the Grand Chessboard. I mean, these are all things you can look up. I mean, the Grand Chessboard, I mean, you can look up that book, you can buy the book. You can PNAC is a real documented. You can look it up. So it's like a lot of times these discussions are happening in the public sphere. I mean, it's just, I think the only people who are paying attention are people who usually agree with them or are in some position of power where what these other people are saying or their philosophies might be more important to them. But, like, I'm not buying Henry Kissinger's book. I might buy a book about Henry Kissinger, but I'm not buying Henry. But somebody else is going to those speeches and hearing him talk at, speech, all these speeches and conferences and stuff like that, and they're hearing what he has to say. So when he does state stuff about the Middle East or about foreign policy, he's influencing other people that are there who also have some influence on foreign policy. So the average person isn't really paying attention to this, so when the Council for Foreign Relations are having these conferences, we're not there listening to every speech and seeing how they're trying to influence or what their ideas are, what their plans are, and how they're influencing other people who have positions of power and influence. So it's I mean, a lot. Corbett and I have talked about like so much of this just out there. It's just a matter of like typing in the right words on that Google search and hitting enter, and you can go down that rabbit hole and you can find the information. And we're talking about Richard again and Dell. that's the other thing that's really interesting about them is that they're not like Alex Jones that it's like, I host a conspiracy, radio show and I'm telling you vaccines are bad or 9/11 was an inside job. No, it's somebody who was completely like they weren't anywhere in the alternative media or had no other fringe ideas. I mean, Del Bigtree, like you said, was a producer of The Doctors, a mainstream show on daytime TV, and they have a lot of mainstream perspectives and other mainstream doctors on there. And then when he found out about this information, it just blew his mind. And same thing with Richard. I mean, he was just an architect. It's not like he was obsessed with the JFK assassination and then found out. No, he was just a regular dude who said this doesn't make sense and went down that rabbit hole and it sparked his interest. And and I like the fact that both of those guys really focus on their topics. They don't expand too much because of the fact that like you're like, oh yeah, why should I believe him because he also has this fringe idea or that fringe idea I don't agree with. It's like they focus on what they know and they'll just overwhelm you with information that it's hard to argue. And these are fights that are going on right now. I had some people from Connecticut, what is it, like Connecticut Alliance of Freedom or something like that, just because there's a lot of stuff going on in Connecticut in regards to they're trying to get rid of the religious exception for vaccines. And I'm going to hopefully have them on in the near future. But like these battles are going on everywhere, and we need people to really be more outspoken than ever. Because one thing I've learned from being so outspoken about vaccinations or natural remedies or the problems we have with medicine and modern medicine, what we call modern medicine, is that there's a lot of people who think like you if you're just willing to spark discussion. Sometimes you will end up in one of those battles where you're like, wow, this was a waste of energy and time. But there's also times where, and I found this with just having any personal conversation with friends, if you're talking about depression or whatever, like some people keep stuff to themselves and because they think that they're going to be judged or they're out in the fringe. And then the second they realize like you might have some similar thinking, they're much more open to sharing, sharing their thoughts and perspectives. So, I mean, I think it is important to have these discussions, even if sometimes it is hard to. But, and I've said this on the show a bunch of times, it is amazing. I mean, I'm wearing a scarf from one of my favorite soccer teams from Portugal. And people can argue about soccer. People can argue about football. People can argue. Like if I went to a family dinner and being Portuguese, it probably would be about soccer if we got an argument there. We get in this huge debate about soccer. Nobody would be like, Ricky, you're an asshole for bringing up soccer,
Right.
But if I brought up 9/11 or vaccines and we got in a similar argument, everybody would be like, why would you bring that up? It's going to spark argument. It's like, well, why are we not allowed to talk about the topics that I feel are actually important, the topics, because I understand, like I love watching MMA, I love watching soccer. It's more of a bonding thing with my son too. We get to watch together, we get to root for a team. But the second that game's over, I know it was just entertainment. It was it. I'm not going to go kill somebody because they're on a different soccer team. I'm not going to, dislike somebody or whatever. I know that it's just entertainment. You need that reset button. You need to be able to, I think, sometimes you do need to have some type of getaway so your brain isn't completely obsessed with all this stuff. And but nobody cares if we argue about the pointless topics. It's like the conversations we should be having and the conversations that are important are the ones that people are telling you not to have. And really, that's the definition of ignorance. It's basically saying I'm going to ignore all new information. I'm not going to take in any new perspectives or information. This is my opinion, and nothing can change that. And the only somebody who truly believes they're all knowing and they're always right can say, hey, I don't need any more information. I already have it all figured out. I don't need anything. So it's like if we all agree that we don't have it all figured out and there's so much information and perspectives and interesting philosophies out there that are worth entertaining, then we should be having these discussions, and we shouldn't be so ignorant. But I think ignorance is bliss sometimes. I mean, my wife, I don't know how your family members are, but my wife, rarely do I get her. I mean, 9/11, like I can get her to get into some 9/11 stuff, and I think it's because we were actually alive and we witnessed Iraq War, we witnessed all the aftermath of it, and so I think it kind of tugs at your heartstrings, and there's still some emotional connection to that event. But you think I'm going to sit her down to watch James Corbett's documentary on the Fed for 2 hours? Like, no, not going to happen.
No. And I'm in the same boat there, and I have to pick my battles. I don't need her to agree with me on all this stuff. I do need her to have an understanding on the vaccination thing, because that's obviously something that is imperative when you have kids, and you have to have that conversation. And we have had that conversation. I want to tell you this really kind of scary vaccination story that we had. Right when we moved to California, we didn't know any pediatricians, weren't really sure who to go to. So the first one we went to, it was just kind of an interview. And so we went in the office, and I think my daughter was about 1 at the time, a little over 1. And he said, "How are we doing on the vaccines?" And I said, "Well, we're on a delayed schedule," which was code for we're not doing it. And in his response to me, he goes, "What's the matter? You don't trust the government?" And I thought he was kidding. So I kind of laughed out loud, and I go, and then I realized he was serious. And I said, no. And he just kind of looked at me and he goes, "Well, now I know what I'm working with here." Real serious like. And I looked at her, I said, "We're out of here." We just got up and left. And it was a really sort of Orwellian feel to it. Like, I got the feeling that like he was going to push a button and the doors were going to lock or something. You know what I mean? It was really weird. And then of course they have the SB 277 that was making it mandatory for kids in California to be fully vaccinated before they started preschool or kindergarten, I think. And it was like, whoa, what's going on here? This sort of push to force people into vaccines. And you want to talk about asking a question and, rhetorical question to get somebody thinking about things. I've said to, people, I've had the vaccine debate with people, and they've said, "Listen, man, you got to get on board with this stuff because they're safe and they're effective," and you're the standard argument. And my question to them is, if vaccines are so safe and so effective, then why have they paid out $4.2 billion in damages to settle these claims? If they're so safe, you wouldn't do that. And then I ask a follow-up question. Do you know who else has paid $4.2 billion in damages to settle lawsuits pertaining to screwing up kids for the rest of their lives? The Catholic Church. And when you draw the parallel between the pedophilia in the Catholic Church that they've paid out over $4 billion and the vaccine industry, everybody knows that the Catholic Church has a problem with pedophilia. And, it's like, well, look, we know about it, and they've made all these payoffs. It's like, well, the vaccine industry has made the same amount of payoffs as well. Why don't we consider them? Why don't we do the same thing? Go, "Oh, we know about them. We know about the vaccine industry. They're, they get a little squirrely from time to time, and they've done some bad things." But if you bring that up to around the wrong people, they get mad at you for pointing out a fact. It is a fact. Through the vaccine court, and to be clear about that, that's a fraction of what they should be paying out, because the hoops you have to jump through to get paid off in the VAERS court are unbelievable, including you have to sign a non-disclosure so that you can't talk about what you received after you received it if you got a settlement from the court. And that part of that non-disclosure says that if you talk about what you got, they can come after you for 10 times the amount that you received. So if that happens, if you're somebody that has a vaccine injured child, you go through the VAERS court, you get $1 million settlement. You can't tell anyone that you got that, because if you do, they'll come after you for $10 million. Now you'll have an injured kid and you'll be living out of your car. So that's the reality of this situation. So because people say, "Well, I haven't heard anything about it." Hey, 4.2, where'd you get those numbers from? I haven't heard anything about that. Well, you mean you haven't heard anything about it on your nightly news? The nightly news that gets 60% of their ad revenue from big pharma? You're never going to hear about it on your nightly news. And so part of what we're facing in this, I hate to bring Alex Jones into this, but he was right when he called it an information war. Part of what we're fighting in the information war is you've got you've got straight out lies, which you get through your media, but then you also get lies by omission. It's the things that they don't talk about. And our parents' generation grew up, watching the nightly news and assuming that what they're, the person's going to tell them what's important that night. So if you heard about something on your nightly news, you figured it was important. And if you didn't hear about it on your nightly news, you assumed that it wasn't important. And that is a dangerous thing to do, because so much of what is really important never even makes it on our nightly news. So the average person kind of goes about their day just thinking, well, if that's a real thing, meaning Building 7 coming down, or if that's a real thing that all these kids are getting vaccine damaged, then why am I hearing about it from you and not on my nightly news? And it's like, because your nightly news is totally corrupted and you're never going to hear about it that way. And so there's this connection that people still have, this assumption that if it's important, it'll be on their news. And that of course, I think we've come to know that it just works itself out of the news cycle after 48 hours or 72 hours if it's something, and then next thing you know, they're on to the next. So this belief that you're going to get the truth from Anderson Cooper is delusional.
Well, and who pays for those vaccine damages? We do. Because
we do, yeah.
Big Pharma doesn't pay for any of that, because they scare the shit out of the government, and they said, hey, if people are getting hurt and we have to pay all these lawsuits, then we're going to stop making vaccines. So they're like, okay, we'll pay for the lawsuits, we'll pay for the core, we'll create our own court and all this stuff. So the taxpayer ends up paying for this stuff. And I mean, the thing that drives me nuts about vaccines is that if we were talking about any other pharmaceutical story of corruption or conspiracy, nobody would have an issue with it. Like, so if we're talking about Bayer, Monsanto, I mean, because they're all basically chemical companies. I mean, they're not medicine. I mean, they're considered medicine companies or food companies. They're chemical companies. And and that's why they're harmful to you, because your body's not designed to consume chemicals. It's designed to consume food. So it's if we're talking about the pill epidemic, if we're talking about whatever corruption and conspiracy story that exists, and there's thousands and thousands of them in regards to Big Pharma. If you're talking about the documentary Prescription Thugs, which I had Chris Bell on from, or back in the day American Addicts with Dr. Gregory Smith, like all these documentaries that have to do with Big Pharma and all this stuff, nobody really seems to have that big of an issue with. But if you bring up vaccines, it's like, so you're telling me that these companies are not moral, they're corrupt. There's obviously evidence of that and examples of that. But they take all the moral people that work there and they say, hey, you guys work on our vaccine department. Like, because that's the one place where we want our moral people, and we're not going to cut any corners or do anything that's shysty. Like, it's ridiculous. It's insane. And, to think that one size fits all in regards to vaccines. We had to change pediatricians not too long ago. My kids never go unless it's a checkup anyways, and it's always the same thing. It's like, we're the unvaccinated parents, so every time we come in, we have to go through these hula hoops of like filling out all this extra paperwork, and it just seemed like it always seems like we're being judged. But regardless, I was always super polite. I always gave the no, we're gonna wait. No, we're gonna, and they try to give you their 2 cents on why it's unsafe to do what we're doing or whatnot. And then, I'd always get in these little debates with them, and they're just like, oh, it's proven to be safe and all. I'm like, and I told my pediatrician, and this was really like what pissed her off. And finally, we ended up getting a letter like a week later saying we need to find a new pediatrician. But, I get in this argument, and never mind, they're arguing with me. I'm trying to prevent getting an argument in front of my son, and they're like literally keep poking at me and just saying, you really should. I'm like, oh, yeah, no, I know. I'll take your advice in consideration and whatnot, this and that. And I'm just trying to keep it short, and they just kept going. And eventually we ended up getting a pretty heated argument. And I'm just like, listen, you do realize the most unscientific thing you can say is that I can shoot one substance into every person that exists in the world, and they're going to have the same response to it. I'm like, I couldn't give everybody peanut butter and have the exact same reaction to it. I'm like, Some people will die. Does it mean that peanut butter will kill everybody? No, but it does mean to some people it's toxic. But I'm like, but I can't go into a school now with peanut butter, right? Because there's so many peanut allergies. So where's the precaution in regards to vaccines? I'm like, you're not testing to see if there's if my kid's allergic to any of the chemicals that are in these vaccines, right? You're just shooting them up to a guinea pig, and we cross our fingers that they're one of the kids that everything's fine. Well, guess what? Like if I have to choose between taking that risk or the risk of whatever you're saying there may be, then I'll take the other risk because, I'm like, I can't live with myself knowing that I'm purposely doing something that could have some harmful effect. And, and your immune system is the best defense against everything anyways. I mean, even if you believe in vaccine science and in some cases, I'm sure there's some vaccines that do work and make sense. And, the idea is still, I'm kind of kickstarting your immune system. Like I'm giving you a virus to kickstart the immune system, so it makes the antivirus to fight. So I'm like, at the end of the day, you're still saying modern medicine sucks and that our immune systems are best defense. So why not focus on giving your kids, healthy foods, probiotics, vitamin C, all the vitamins it needs to have a nice, strong immune system. So, and then when it does get sick, it can fight that off. I'm like, why isn't that a conversation we're having? Instead, we're like, it doesn't matter that you're feeding your kid Mickey D's every day and eating candy and drinking soda. We're going to give them this vaccine. It's like, well, and then when they do get sick, their body's weak and it doesn't have the strength. It's not healthy enough to fight whatever it gets. So, I mean, the whole system is broken, and you talked about the media. Besides wars, I've never seen the media do such a good job of pushing propaganda than on the vaccine debate.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at Robert De Niro, when he was on, it was like the morning show or something like that. I remember my wife telling me about it, so I would watch the clips and watch the videos of it. And initially, before he watched the Vaxxed film, like they were all about, they seemed very friendly to him, and he was just kind of like, yeah, and then he did another interview after he watched the film, and all he was saying was that, and he said this on Good Morning America or the Today Show, one of the morning shows, and they're interviewing him, and he's like, all I'm saying is that I think there's something there, and people should watch this film, and some questions should be asked. And all of a sudden, the same host who was friendly with him all the other times he appeared on the show was now grilling him and saying, well, what are you saying? And it seemed like obviously she was getting some push from behind the scenes of like, hey, grill him on this, ask him these questions and this and that, trying to make him look bad. And and it's just like he has a vaccinated child, okay? He watched the film, and all he's saying is watch the film and come up with your own opinion. But watch the film, get the information, and see that perspective of the argument. And Vax has been pulled from Amazon Prime, I believe. I had filmmakers from a great documentary called The Big Secret or The Big Lie. One of the two. Maybe I should look that up before I say it. But either way, it was about the history of medicine, and I mean, Edward Griffin's in it. Some of James Corbett's work's in there. So they actually did a really good job of like going through the history of medicine, how we went from like root extracts and food being considered medicine to what we live in today, and that gets pulled. So all the Brzezinski documentaries, I think, which I had Dr. Brzezinski on. He's somebody who's been curing cancer since like the late 80s, early 90s. His documentaries, I believe, have been pulled. So like they're not even letting you see the other side of the argument. And it's like, so you have these people in power who are saying, this is my opinion, and I'm going to force feed you my opinion. And I'm not like, if the other side of the argument is so kooky, and if I want to watch a documentary on flat Earth, I should have the right to watch it. I mean, if I'll watch it, and then I'll decide afterwards, like, yeah, that's just silly, or I can watch it and be like, oh, actually, they made some points, but I should still have the right to watch it and challenge my own ideas. Now it's just like you're force feeding opinions. I mean, I'm sure when you were writing your book and when I started this podcast, you could go online and pretty easily you could find alternative perspectives and alternative media websites. Today, you search for any topic, 9/11, JFK, vaccines, all you're going to get is the mainstream media. All you're going to get is like their article, their story, their video. And, that's why we need these podcasts to survive, because it's like the one few places where, when you listen to Ripple Effect podcast, when you listen to Tinfoil Hat podcast, when you listen to Greg Carlwood's podcast, whoever it may be. These are real people who are really just trying to share interesting ideas, and we haven't been touched by those in power or by corporations or anybody else who might fuck up this whole thing. And so I think people really, that's why podcasts are continue to grow, and they haven't really plateaued much, because I think they plateaued a little bit like a few years ago when everybody had a podcast. You're like, oh my God, there's so many fucking podcasts. But now less and less people are trusting the media. Less and less people are trusting newspapers or articles or anything that's mainstream, that they're looking for alternatives. And so I think that these type of discussions are so important.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I think I've read that there's 850,000 podcasts out there. Well, there's going to be 850,001, because I've got my own show is starting soon called Macroaggressions with Charlie Robinson. It's going to be carried on David Icke's platform, Iconic.
Nice.
You'll be able to, that'll be the video version there. You'll be able to get the audio version everywhere else. So that'll probably start in March. We've already banked about 10 episodes of the audio only one, starting some face-to-face interviews with some interesting characters out there, some of whom we've already named. Richard's going to come on, and James said he'll come on as well. So excited to do that. And I'm with you, because it's like, where are you going to hear about these topics? You're not going to find it on your nightly news. You're not going to find it on mainstream media. There was a time when you might be able to get some of these fringe topics on Netflix. It's kind of mainstream, but even that's changing. It seems like they're pushing some sort of weird agenda there. So we're kind of banished to our corner of the internet, where we can talk about the things that we find interesting. And I credit Joe Rogan in part for that, because for starting a lot of the discussions. He's had some interesting people on his show. Obviously, you get MMA guys, but you get Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock on there to talk about things. And so you start to cross-pollinate these people. You get people that are interested in science coming on, watching Joe Rogan, and then they get introduced to somebody that's an MMA guy, or David Goggins or somebody, and they're like, oh, interesting, I would have never heard about him. Also, take Joe Rogan's MMA crowd, and they might get exposed to Graham Hancock, and they're like, well, that's kind of interesting. I never even would have thought to read America Before, his book, or Fingerprints of the Gods, or something like that. So I like what Rogan has done with his podcast by bringing in a bunch of different, unusual voices that maybe wouldn't share the same platform. He's been able to cross-pollinate his audience and get them interested in things that they might not normally be interested in. And so, there's the podcast. Obviously, he's at the top of the heap as far as podcasts go, but the rest of us, that are down sort of below that, we're still talking about some interesting topics that don't get a whole lot of airtime. And it's being actively suppressed in some cases by social media and by search engines. I just got thrown off of Twitter a couple days ago. Literally banned from Twitter. And what was my crime? What was my crime against Twitter humanity? Someone made a comment. Someone posted something about Bill Gates and talking about his involvement in, the Wuhan, the coronavirus simulation that they ran 90 days earlier. And my comment was, when are we all going to throw this guy in a volcano?
That's all you said?
Jokingly, like, I'm really going to go grab Bill Gates and throw him into a volcano.
There's porn on Twitter. You could see. There's
porn on Twitter. I was thrown off for inciting violence.
Oh my God.
Not suspended. Deleted.
Well, there's something weird about the Bill Gates thing, because I shared on my Instagram story, and it's linked to my Facebook page, where a little video about Bill Gates, the Wuhan, and the coronavirus, and for some reason I couldn't share it. Every time I attempted to share it on Facebook, it wouldn't let me. And it was like this. It's weird, because Facebook actually owns Instagram, but I don't know if it's different people running it, or they have different softwares or whatever. But it got through on Instagram, and they would not let me. And it's not the first time I've tried to share stuff on Facebook that it wouldn't let me. So, I mean, all these platforms are just, it's getting so, I mean, unfortunately, it is like okay, as long as they don't kick me off, I'm gonna keep using it because I can share these conversations, and I can hopefully somebody, if one person sees a tweet and clicks on the link, then it's worth having. But people need to understand that there's so much out there that's just being suppressed, and and they're, like I said, they're force feeding you their narrative, and you can't question things anymore. You can't ask questions anymore. You can't see the other perspectives. You can't see, the most fringe ideas, and so yeah, I mean, and I was going to ask you about that too, because I remember just recently I went on your Twitter account. I'm like, let me see if he has anything going on, tweeting anything about your trip or whatnot. And I'm like, where the fuck's his Twitter account? I'm like,
gone. Banished. Yeah, they're suppressing information, but you and I have been going to the grocery store our entire life, right? And you go through the checkout counter and there's the National Enquirer with Elvis eating ding dongs at a Kroger someplace, and you go, okay, well, where's the government to protect me from that disinformation, that fake news?
Well, it's
right?
funny you said that, because when I was a kid, I remember looking at those magazines and being so confused. I'm like, I thought he was dead. I mean, like every time, because my parents didn't read or write any English, so I couldn't ask my parents. I couldn't be like, Mom, what the hell? She probably didn't even know who Elvis was. But like, I would see those things, and I'm like, wait, they did find UFOs? Like they're admitting,
right.
Like but you're right. Like to a kid, that can be super confusing. Who's protecting me as a child from, this manipulation and yeah.
We gotta ban all fake news. We have to, actually, and I incorporated this into my talk. It is frustrating that in the alternative media we are being silenced and shadow banned and deplatformed and all that stuff. I'm obviously now just going through it with Twitter on a very small scale, of course, but it's frustrating. But there is one good part of this, and that is they wouldn't be doing it if we weren't being effective. They're legitimately afraid of the information getting out there. And anytime you suppress information or you tell your kids you can't do that, and you don't really give them a good reason why they can't do it, you just say you can't do it. Well, it makes them more interested in doing it. It makes them more interested in, if you're suppressing information, then to me, my question is, why are you suppressing it? Are you suppressing it because it might actually be true and it challenges the official narrative, which of course I think is the case in a lot of with the alternative media, and talking about, like I said, talking about vaccines and having that conversation shut down immediately. It's like, well, hang on a second. If I'm such a kook, if it's so flat earth of me to bring up this topic of vaccines, and it's so crazy on its face, then why not let us have the debate and let me discredit myself by bringing up all this stupid information that's clearly fake news, right? Because if this information is so preposterous, then you should welcome the debate. But they don't do that. They don't want that. And the reason is not because the information is crazy and wrong. It's because the information a lot of the times is accurate, and they don't want the debate. And so if they can't have a debate where both sides can argue their point, then what they do is they just shut the topic, the conversation down altogether, and which is what they've been doing with vaccines, right? If us anti-vaxxers are so crazy, let us expose ourselves as being crazy people. Let's have the debate. Let's do that. But what we find is that when you get into that debate, the anti-vaccine position is a lot stronger than many of the people think, than they realized. And what they find is when you watch a movie like Vaxxed, it's like, just watch the movie. They're not selling you. I mean, they're selling you a ticket to come to the movie or whatever, but they're just presenting stories of people. I know plenty of moms that have vaccine damaged kids. I dare you to talk to one of those moms and tell them that it's all in their head, that it's all just some big coincidence.
Yeah, that drives me crazy when people are like, oh, you just didn't realize your kid was autistic. First of all, when you're a parent, like every little thing that they learn, that they do differently, I mean, you figure it out, like, oh, have you noticed that they're saying this word now, or that they're saying it properly, or that, they're even when my daughter was like just putting together longer sentences, I picked up on the fact, I'm like, oh, you notice that, our daughter's sentences, like she's doing long, it's like all these little, so you're telling me you just didn't notice? Like nobody knows the child better than the parent who's with it every day. definitely the doctor who sees it every couple months or once a month for 10 seconds during a visit's not going to know if it's something that was there and they didn't pick up on it or whatnot. Like, it's insanity. Like, and you brought up Joe Rogan. There's one thing about Joe Rogan that's been, and believe me, like, I'm a huge fan of Joe Rogan, like you said, for those reasons that you said, because if they say copying is the greatest sign of flattery. Like, I mean, I started this podcast 6 years ago because I love Joe Rogan's podcast, and I wanted to feel like I could contribute something and do something. And even very similar in regards to, like, I'm super curious and I didn't want to get bored always talking about the same stuff. So, I would have musicians on, like the singer Fear Factory, and then I would have comedians on, and the Amazing Jonathan, whoever, like. And
he's great, by the way. I met him in Vegas. He's a phenomenal guy. He's a really fun guy.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, he was. I was a big fan of his too, and I saw him when he was on his last tour. Well, before, when he thought he was going to die, and couldn't do it for much longer. I saw him on his last tour, and then eventually he came on the show, and we had like a really heart-to-heart conversation about, like, what it's like knowing that, like, you could be pretty close to the finish line and all this, It was really interesting. And but yeah. So I was hoping that that people who came on, because I did have a musician that they liked, might run into a libertarian that I had on, or and maybe get exposed some new perspectives, and vice versa, or a documentary filmmaker or whatever. And so I mean, I love what he did, because I think that because he's so curious and into so many different things, it does help expose different people to different things. But so of late, and I still listen to him, pretty often from time to time, and it is hard to listen to all the podcasts, that you subscribe to, because there's just so many fucking podcasts, and there's so much stuff that I want to listen to. But one thing he has said a lot recently, and I've heard him in different discussions with different guests, is that my show's kind of gone, because guests will talk about, like, how big the show has gotten, and he's like, he's talking about how, like, it's gotten so big, like, initially he didn't understand the impact the show had, and, like, consciously he's like starting to understand that, like, there's a responsibility to the show and all this stuff, and kind of saying, because a lot of people have given him shit about, like, not being so open to, like, fringe guests or fringe conversations, and kind of straying away from some of the other stuff, the conspiracy theories that he was into and whatnot, and if his show has gotten so big that he feels like now my responsibility is to not have these conversations, I think he has it all wrong, because I think the bigger his show is, now that he does have this impact, and he has tons of people watching. I mean, you have people like Bernie Sanders on, and you have Rolling Stones on, Kiss. I mean, you have Metallica. You have all these huge guests on. He had Iron Man on not too long ago. Yeah, and so it's like you have all these huge guests on. Like, how awesome would it be that somebody went there to listen to this interview you had with this politician or this actor or whoever, and they get exposed to that fringe topic, that maybe alternative perspective on history, or something that's a little taboo. Like, it really, and I guess I'm just going on a random tangent, but it bothers me when I can see him, because initially I thought it was just like he was just getting so big that he was getting these bigger guests. But it sounds like over and over again there's these little hints in the way he talks about how big his show has gotten, that there these little hints that give you just a behind-the-scenes look of his into his thinking. And it seems like he's purposely trying to stay away from these, things that really brought people like yourself and me into his show, and I think that's a huge, huge mistake.
I do too. Yeah, I could do without Barry Weiss and Mike Baker from the CIA and these guys being on the show over and over again. I could kind of do without that. But yeah, I mean, I think I saw the Forbes article came out that said that he made $30 million last year from his podcast. That you start to have a lot of money at stake. And of course, if you make $30 million, you don't have to do anything ever again, but you also might consider the fact that if I made 30 million last year, doing a great podcast that I love doing. I want to continue doing it.
See, I don't
He's
know
already had to switch off of the live portion. He can't do it live anymore. He's had to do
YouTube.
it.
Yeah, he claims it's because YouTube kept giving him shit for they would show a video or play music or something in the background, and they would pull it. So this way they can kind of manage that before it goes on air. I don't know if that's true or not. It could be. Maybe he wanted to cut. Some people have obviously. The conspiracy theorist in me, has heard things like, he wants to cut out certain parts of the conversation if he needs to or whatnot. There has been people who like accidentally said their whole email address on the air, and he's like, you don't want to do that, and he's like, we're live, you're fucked, it's already out there. But I don't know if it's about the money, because the reason the show got big is because I don't think any of us ever believed he was motivated by money. I felt like we all believe, like, if you listen to him enough, and that's the thing about these conversations, you're gonna with your podcast the same way. People are gonna hear so many hours of you sharing your ideas and sharing your thoughts that they're going to feel like they know you, and they're going to have a really good idea who Charlie is and where he stands on things and who he is as a person. I think that's why people end up falling in love with certain people or certain shows, because it's like, I feel like I really know this person, and and I think with him, it's like he really wasn't motivated by money. I've gotten people who don't listen to the show, I've gotten in discussions where they're like, oh, he's obviously motivated. I'm like, I don't think he is. I'm like, I honestly think that he's afraid of doing some harm, because I feel like internally he's a good person, and he feels like I could say something that really hurts somebody's feelings or sparks this uproar, and he's just trying to be responsible. But I also think that he, in the same aspect, some of the things that could have some negative impact, he's also preventing having all those conversations and podcasts that could have a lot of positive impact too. And so I think a lot of it's just like the show's gotten so big. Like you said, he's on the front of newspapers and articles, and everything that's said on that show becomes like clickbait. It's like, did you hear that Elon Musk did this or this, or that, so it's like, I think that fear of like, okay, who knows what I'm going to say that's going to end my career or get me in some serious trouble, and this is going to be way bigger than just me being in front of a microphone and talking. I think that becomes that he's just afraid that like something bad could really happen. I think personally. I could be wrong, but
well, and you mentioned Elon Musk, and he probably got a firsthand view of how what they're doing on that show can impact, how it has a ripple effect, as you say, across the universe. Because when Elon Musk fired up a joint with him on that show, I think Tesla lost $5 billion of valuation, the following day. So that doesn't really. It's not like it really matters all that much, because stock market prices go up and go down, and Tesla stock has gone through the roof and everything. But just the fact that what these two guys in this little room doing something that, if the camera wasn't on, would be a non-issue, that it had this repercussions throughout the financial world. It cost him, he had to step down off of the board, I think. He had, Elon Musk had a lot of issues from that, between that and saying that they were going to do their buyback at a dollar price of $4.20, and everyone thought that was kind of funny, and we can't have a stoner as the CEO of Tesla and everything. It's like, wait a second. So Rogan's getting a chance to see that his show, has real world impact to a lot of people, and what they do there matters. It's gone from them just talking, getting high and smoking cigars and doing dick jokes and everything, talking with his buddies about, multiple universes and things like that, to like, I have to be careful about what I say because it could tank somebody's stock price. It's crazy that it's gotten to that point, but that's the influence that he has. And I think, I think Joe Rogan deserves a lot of credit for launching the podcast world. Of course, there's lots of people doing it, but I always knew that if I wanted something to watch on YouTube and I wasn't really sure, and it was a guest I hadn't heard of, I was willing to give them a chance and click play, just because in the past I had been pleasantly surprised by some of the other guests that I had come to learn or discover through that show. So I like it. I like what like you mentioned what you're doing, bringing in musicians and hoping that somebody that follows that musician says, oh, well, I like this show. I like this format. I like Ricky. He's cool. Obviously I tuned in to hear my favorite, lead singer, doing this interview, but I like Ricky's demeanor and I like the conversation they had. And if this conversation was good with my guy, maybe I'll listen to the conversation with this guy, Richard Wolff, who I've never heard of before. It sounds familiar. Maybe I saw him on MSNBC. Let's hear what he has to say. And then you start that chain reaction where you're as I said, cross-pollinating your audience with different audiences. And it's you're getting them exposed to new people that they might never hear about. And that's the beauty of the internet. There's a lot of really shitty things wrong with the internet, but there is some good out there, and that is that you can expose people to information or people that other people that they might not have heard of or would on a normal basis never come in contact with. We get that ability. It's a double-edged sword. We obviously have to be careful who we're being exposed to and what their agendas are and everything, but it is a nice platform that allows us to share this information. Of course, the people that are in positions of power, as I wrote about in my book, they are very concerned with remaining in power. And sometimes these conversations can threaten their grip on their current power structure. And so they see that as a challenge, and they have to silence that conversation. So it's kind of something to look for. If there's a topic that seems to be off limits, you have to think, well, it's off limits because it's a challenge to somebody's grip on power. And if it's challenging their grip on power, then I want to listen to it.
Yeah, well, you seem very open to seeing other perspectives and opinions. So, yeah, I mean, you're very similar to myself to why you were attracted to Joe Rogan. I was just like you. Like, there's so many guests on there that I had no idea who the hell they were. Then I listened to conversation, and I became a fan. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Graham Hancock. I mean, I've had tons of people on the show from I mean, I've had Daniele Vignelli on a bunch of times. I had Dan Carlin on a long time ago. Eddie Bravo's been on. I mean, so many guests, I had on from, and it was funny because the one guest I had on, two guests I've had on before Rogan, it was like, I was so excited. I'm like, oh, I got Jesse Ventura on before Rogan never had him on. And
oh, wow.
And then I had Dr. Don McDiagostino. He's the ketogenic expert. I had him on before Rogan, and actually I remember emailing him and being like, hey, you need to get on Rogan because this information is important and whatnot. And he's like, oh, I'm actually scheduling to be on his show next week. And I'm like, oh, awesome. So
that's great. That'll change your career. That'll turbo boost your career for sure.
Yeah, I'm hoping somebody brings up my show. It's like that's all it takes. It's like somebody could just name drop my show on his show.
Oh, I was so close to it too because Eddie Bravo was on with Brandon Schaub, and they were and Brian Cowan. The four of them were in there, and they were talking about something unrelated. And Eddie Bravo brought up Sean Atwood. And Sean Atwood talking about Epstein. And he was talking about the interview that Sean Atwood did where they were talking about the house next door to Epstein's New York mansion and the ownership structure of that. And that was my interview I was doing with Sean Atwood. And he mentioned Sean's name like 3 times. And he didn't mention mine. And I was so happy he was even talking about it. But I was like, just throw my name out there, for God's sake. Can you give me a break?
I've had situations like that, too.
I was texting Sam Tripoli. I was like, dude, whose dick do you have to suck to get on Joe Rogan? You know what I mean? Like, this is great. They were talking about an interview I was doing. They can't have Sean Atwood come on because Sean did 7 years in a Arizona federal prison for ecstasy distribution, and and he was banned from the U.S. He's a UK guy, and he's banned from the U.S., so he can't come in. But I'm texting Sam going, tell Eddie I'll come in and explain the Epstein stuff. I'll give Sean's perspective. But it was funny because I was getting all these people going, hey, they're talking about your interview. I was like, what are you talking about? So I got close. That's as close as I've got to being on Rogan.
Yeah, because I do. Yeah, you were just on Sean's show not too long ago, and I did hear Eddie on Fighter and the Kid. So that's hilarious. Yeah, I mean, I've had Hunter Motz on, who's like one of Brian Cowan's good friends. They used to have a show called Mixed Mental Arts. Are you familiar with that show?
No, I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, it used to be called the Brian Callen Show. Then they changed it to Mixed Mental Arts. But yeah, like I'm the same way. I'm like, I keep thinking like, we have enough connections where somebody might, bring it up, but it is. I mean, that's the impact of the show, that somebody like yourself or mine, or like, if they just mentioned, I mean, look what he did for London Real. I mean, before Rogan had him on, I mean, I'm not sure how successful they were, but it was kind of an unknown show. And now it's Brian Rose has this huge
Brian's
show.
doing all kinds of stuff now.
Yeah, I love Brian, but he always seems like I'm being sold something. I'm like, I always feel like it's an infomercial at 2 a.m. It's like there's that aspect. But then when he sits down and has the conversations, I'm like, no, I still like the show. But
yeah, he did a really good sort of just monologue to his cell phone talk that I saw maybe 2 months ago, where he was maybe not even that, maybe just 1 month ago, where he was talking about his alcoholism. And going into that was a really fascinating conversation. So he was the whole, the last couple of years, I mean, for 20 years or so, he's been like a really hardcore alcoholic, and he has just gotten himself off of it. I'm not sure how long. I think it's been about a year, but it was fascinating to hear him talk about that. And I like his stuff. I like, you said David Icke on there, and he talked about that program he went through with, what's the guy, the wealthy guy who's kind of an asshole?
Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah. The always swearing, like older guy.
He showed like that program that he went through with this guy, once again, that's a prime example. I would have never known who he was, the London Real show and Brian and those guys. I would have never known who they were if it wasn't for the internet and for the podcasting world and for YouTube and all that. And I'm pissed at YouTube because, they're silencing all this alternative media. And it's a shame because it's one of the things that made YouTube so great. And now I'm getting, suggestions on the side of my YouTube bar where it says, Fox News and MSNBC. And it's like, I've never watched any of this stuff. Why are you suggesting? In fact, when it comes up on my suggestion things, I'm deleting and deleting and deleting. You're supposed to be this smart company and you're figuring out what I want based on my viewing habits, but you're not delivering it anymore. And that's, of course, by design. So it's frustrating in that sense. But like I said, I feel like maybe these conversations that we've been having, that you guys have been doing, you've been doing for 6 years and everything, they're really important. And some of them challenge the establishment and they want to silence that. So it's a feather in your cap in the sense that, you're being shadow banned because of the topics that you're talking about. They must be important, but it's frustrating too, because I go to, like at an Acapulco, I'm talking to guys like Josh Sigurdson from World Alternative Media and Luke Rudowski and these guys. I mean, they're watching their income just evaporate, just turned off like that because they've been banned on these platforms. They don't get that sort of they don't get the sort of numbers they got, and which translates directly into advertising dollars, and it's a shame. And so if they can't, they'll silence your information, but then they'll also cut off your money supply too. So it's really devious. And I understand people say, well, it's their platform, they can do what they want with it. Okay, all right, whatever. I get that, but still, they're actively suppressing it. They're not letting the market or the viewer or the eyeballs or whatever dictate what is a popular video anymore. They're slapping some algorithm on it that makes it so that it doesn't get broadcast out to people, and that's dirty.
So before I let you go, let's talk about or share with us any new information on your book that you have coming out and any information that you have on your podcast. When is that stuff going to be available? When do you think it's going to be available? That type of stuff.
The new book with Jeff Berwick, we were hoping to get it out by this in Acapulco, but it didn't happen because he had so much on his plate. So we're finishing up some edits and tweaking it around. I'm hoping to have it out in maybe the next 3 months or so. As soon as it's out, I'll send you a copy and maybe we can chat about it. I liked working with Jeff on it because he's was Canadian. Now he lives in Mexico and he doesn't really consider himself a citizen of any country really. And so he's able to be objective about the current state of the United United States in a way that I'd like to be, but I'm not sure I always can be as an American. So he's brought in an interesting component to the book. So it'll be out soon, hopefully within the next 2 months or so.
Does it have a title?
And as far as the podcast goes, it'll start in March. And Iconic is David Icke's platform, ICKONIC.com, and there's all sorts of interesting people on there doing great shows. So it's like YouTube for people that for the information that's getting shadow banned or deleted off of YouTube has a home on Iconic's platform. And of course, any sort of association with David Icke helps, because I consider him to be, he's one of the two people that really inspired me to write my book, with John Perkins and his book Confessions of an Economic Hitman being one component, David Icke and him waking me up to, sort of this centuries-long plan for world domination, which sounds really, dark and mysterious and everything, but David's persona, his sense of humor, his ability to deliver the information in a really easy to digest way always really connected with me. And so to have an association with them and to be on his platform is humbling and exciting, and I'm enthusiastic. So we're gonna start pretty soon. And one of the guests I really want to get on is you. So hopefully you'll be I was gonna say we could reverse the roles, but really this isn't like an interview. This is just two guys bullshitting. You know what I mean? It's not like I have a prepared list of questions.
Yeah, which is what I think people like about it. So is that the type of thing that you're going to be doing? Or are you going to kind of do a more casual conversation?
Yeah, there's two components of it. One part is an audio only version that I'm doing, which I'm taking topic by topic in my book, and I've got 10 episodes already put together for that, which we want to wait till we have a good library and then launch with a bunch. So if someone likes one, they can binge a couple of them, and then it'll be a weekly thing. And then the video component as well will go up on Iconic, and I'll take the audio out and send that out as in the form of a podcast as well. So kind of like what you're doing, all the iTunes and SoundCloud and all those places. So you'll be able to find it. And it's called Macroaggressions with Charlie Robinson. And it's just me, talking to interesting people about fascinating topics, people that inspired me, people that are in my book, people that I'm just coming into contact with. At Anarchapulco, I set up a lot of those interviews. So we'll be filming starts for me next week.
Awesome. Yeah.
And if anyone wants information, you can find my website is theoctopusofglobalcontrol.com. You can find just about everything about the book, and future podcast will be there, so people can check that out.
Awesome. And if by any chance there's any past guests that you would like some contact information, let me know. I appreciate that. Yeah, there definitely will be. You always get great guests. I don't even, sometimes I don't know how I do it. It's a lot of late night going through, like I'll find like some old, sometimes it's the weirdest shit. Like I'll go on like some old Facebook page that they have, and I'll go in their contact information, and they'll just happen to have an email there. They won't have an email address on their website, on their Twitter account, and nowhere else. And it'll be like some old, or sometimes it's a Facebook page or a website specifically to a book that they wrote. Because sometimes you have similar to title your website, you'll come out with this book, and then you have a website dedicated to that book, and no other spot will there be an email address, but I'll find one email address. I'm like, let me try this one, So it just, I'm just, and I'll just keep attempting it, to be honest. I'm sure there's some people going through emails are like, this motherfucker's emailing me again. I'm gonna have to respond. I'm sure that happens.
Hey, we got to fill content, and people want to hear from the. It's like, I would be flattered if someone reaches out to me and says, I want to have you on the show. Like, thank you for wanting me to be on the show. Let's do it. It'd be great if it was Joe Rogan, but it doesn't matter. I did the podcast with these guys that that reached out to me and they said, we'd love to have you on our show, probably via Skype, unless you happen to live in Denver. And I was like, I happen to live in Denver. So I went over to their house and recorded their first interview with a guest. Was me in the basement in this podcast studio that they'd built, and they just got started with it. And I was like, they're like, we're so glad you came over. I'm like, I'm flattered that you would want me to come in and do the show. Let's do it. So we went out to dinner before, and then we came back and did the podcast, and we had a blast. It was so much fun. So I just love that we can have these conversations like you and I said. It's like I can't really have them with my wife, not in a deep level without her sort of tuning me out, but I can go on the internet and talk to interesting people like you, and we can talk about crazy shit. And what's even crazier than that is that there are a bunch of people listening to it because they're like, yeah, we're into that too. Like we would pull up a chair and join this conversation as well if we could, and I love that. I think that's so great because if we're going to change this world, if we're going to fix the things that are broken, we got to first start by having the conversations about what it is, and then we have the discussion about, okay, what's wrong, what can we do to fix it, what are some of the ideas we put this together. It's the first step. It's not like podcasts are going to fix the world, but having the conversation is probably the first step towards starting down that process. And it's impossible to quantify what that means to someone in the future. But if someone's listening to this and they say, hey, this Charlie guy, he's a dope. If he could write a book, I can write a book too. You know what I mean? Good. Do it. Write a book. Go out and write a book. You think you can start a podcast? Go for it. You might wind up starting the greatest podcast in the history of podcasts. Whatever. Let's do it. I'm all for people getting involved and people trying to because my book came out of a conversation with my mom when my mom just said, you've got all this information in your head and that's great, but like, what are you going to do with it? And I didn't know. It never crossed my mind I had to do anything about it. And so for me, I took the next step, which was, instead of just being a consumer of this information, that I decided I would try and package it together and do my part and put it out there into the world and see if it helped people. And I've had a great response from the book. I'm humbled that people would read it. It's 540 pages. It's a big one. You don't have to start at the first page and read all the way through. You can jump in the middle and it makes just as much sense. It doesn't really matter. But to have people say, oh, I read your book, and I got a lot out of it. That's like the greatest thing ever, because in my mind, I was writing it for myself. I was writing it to, who knows if it was ever going to see the light of day. And the fact that it's gone out there into the universe and and people are buying it and reading it and sharing it is just the coolest thing ever. So I would say to people that are listening to this, if you've got the ability to do something, maybe it's just talk to your family. Maybe it's talk to your friends. Maybe you're a comedian and you can incorporate this into your act. Some of these cool things. There's a lot of people that are hungry for this information out there, and don't worry about people telling you that you should strap on your tinfoil hat, because that's okay too. Just laugh and just go with the flow, because the information that we're putting out, I feel like is it's more important than any potential ridicule you might get, and that stuff doesn't really matter anyway.
It's funny because Dan Carlin has a similar story on why he started his podcast, because he was always sharing these historical stories at dinner time, and they're like, why don't you just do something with that? Like, just do, Yeah. So, and then he eventually, started a podcast that became one of the biggest history podcasts in the world. Yeah. And so, I mean, every great change starts with just some ideas. I remember having CJ Werleman on some years ago, and he's this author from Australia, and we were talking about difference between Australia and America, and he talked about pub culture, how in in Australia they still hang out at the pub, they drink, they conversate, they debate. And in America, it's not like that, and people go to the bar and they're watching TVs or listening to music and nobody's talking and discussing. And I think the power of conversation is so important, because a lot of times, even when you're challenging other people's ideas, not just when you're having your ideas challenged, you kind of have to work out your ideas while you're doing it in the process. So you'll figure out like, oh, I might not have this as figured out as I thought, or I didn't really think this out well, or whatnot. Or somebody challenges your ideas and you'll be like, you know what? they're right. Actually, I really need to figure this out. So these discussions are super important because one thing I'm sure you've learned from doing interviews, and I've learned from doing them, is that having these conversations is that you're also getting something from it. It's not just a listener. The people participating are getting something from it and growing in the process. So we're all helping each other, so. Yeah.
And I'll end it with this by saying that my philosophy has come to this point, which is I reserve the right to change my mind on topics if I'm presented with new information. So I'm not going to try, I'm trying to not get married to any one idea. I mean, I believe it, but if I'm wrong about something, I just want to get it right. I kind of want to, it's tough to do, but you kind of want to check your ego and just say, look, my goal is to get the info. Like I admit that in my book, there will come a time when some of the things in my book, I will be proven to be wrong on them. And I don't love that, of course, but I accept it because some of this information is buried, and it's hidden behind layers of secrecy and half-truths, and all these people have an interest in protecting it and pushing out disinformation. So it's hard to get to the truth, but I kind of come at it with the approach of it. If I get new information that changes the way I think about something or feel about something, then I have to be, big enough to say, well, that's something I've never considered. In fact, not only have I not considered that, I think you might actually be right on that, and I'm going to examine that. So that's part of this, and I think that actually just kind of goes to everybody's credibility too. You have to sort of be willing to accept and admit when you've been wrong about something, and that's okay because we're going to get it wrong. We're going up against the best disinformation agents in the world, right? And the CIA and the media and the government and all this. So we've got our work cut out for us, and we're gonna. I feel like we're mostly right though. From time to time, we might find that we're wrong, but that's okay. As long as your intention is on getting it right in the end, then I don't think we'll take too much criticism from people. And I enjoy the debates. I enjoy, like you said, the conversations with people. The interview process is fun. I get to. You've had conversations with people that I don't even know, so your information comes from a totally different source, which is great. I can combine that with my information. And together we might be able to figure this shit out.
Yeah, that's the goal, right? I say
that's the goal.
Life's a billion piece puzzle, and I think every piece of information or everything you figure out is one more piece of that puzzle. And at the end of our journey, we might not have all the pieces together, but you try to gather as many as possible to kind of have a clearer picture of what it's all about. So that's kind of the goal. So I mean. Well, thanks a lot, Charlie. I really appreciate your time. Good luck, obviously, with completing the book and starting the podcast. And we'll definitely have you on again when the book comes out. And, keep in touch. I mean, I love doing these. So, I'm open to having these discussions anytime.
Next time we'll jump on a swap cast, because I love when you do that, because to have it Brady Bunch style where you've got the people in the four corners and everybody's bringing in their own top. Those are great. Sam looks like he's broadcasting from his kitchen.
I know Sam's always it's always because he'll be eating. He'll have like things going on in the background, and then he's the funniest one too. So I'm like it kind of makes sense because we're all trying to sound
perfect.
Yeah, because Sam just gives Sam is Sam. So what you see is what you get, but that's what we love about him. It breaks my heart because you always get some YouTube commenters who are like, "Who's this guy?" Da, da, da. And I'm like, "You don't get it. That's just he's a comedian." I'm like, that's why he's funny, is because he's just himself and he doesn't care, But he's always super polite. He's always willing to admit when he's wrong. And he's making a conscious effort because he started when I had him on my podcast. The Tinfoil Hat podcast just came out, and he went from doing like the Punch Drunk podcast and being a comedian and being a guest on other people's shows to now he's really become a podcast that a lot of people who are going to eventually listen to your podcast and mine they listen to his. He's going to be in the rotation. It's one of those shows where you go to listen to alternative perspectives and opinions. So he's really done something good, and you don't have to agree with him on everything or even like him, No,
but every time I've done his show has been fun. The fans are super. They're super enthusiastic and really knowledgeable. In fact, one of the fans met up with. He's like, hey, I was in Vegas at the same time I was in Vegas. He and I went out to breakfast together. He's just one of the guys, the fans from the show, who's in the
awesome.
Facebook group, and we just chatted about politics and everything. So I'm meeting interesting people, but that's great. I think Sam also knows that during those swapcasts, he'll defer to James a lot of times when it's like the real content, like when he's getting in the real nitty gritty. He's like, let's just have James go ahead and handle this one.
Yeah, I always feel bad for James's fans too, because I get so much shit for the swears. I'll get people, email me and they'll be like, can you guys quit swearing? I've been listening to James Corbett forever, and I listen to it with my kids, and I'm like, listen, just be warned. When James is on my show, like, all the stuff you're used to is going to go out the door, because it's like, I want people to be as casual and as themselves as possible, and if that means F-bomb comes out from time to time or a dick joke comes out, then let it be it. But that's what makes it fun, too, is that I think why James has come on my show so often, why we've gotten along so often. I remember we had kids around the same time. We had one show where I felt really bad because we literally talked 45 minutes about being parents, and I'm just like, oh my God. I'm like, people are going to fucking hate this show because they're going to be like, oh, James Corbett, I'm going to get all this information, and he's so full of knowledge, and it's like talking about dad stuff, and I'm just like, and then of course there's some swearing, and and I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, he's going to share this on his website, and everybody's going to hate me,
But I love that.
Yeah.
Don't you? I kind of like that even more though, because and I didn't spend too much time with James, but we hung out a little bit in Acapulco. You're like, well, I know you from the computer. I see you on the computer, and I see your work, and I know you as this person, which I don't really know you, but I know you as this person, James. And then you hang out, and you're like, oh, he's exactly like that in real life. He's just a normal guy, and everyone's telling dirty jokes and everything, and he's kind of laughing and shaking his head, sort of like when Sam's on and Sam's talking about lizard people are everywhere, and James is just going, oh jeez. But that's what works, that dynamic. I think that, and the fact that James comes on and talks about parenting with you is cool, because then you get to see like a human side to these people. Not to say that he's an inhuman or non-human or anything like that, but you know what I mean. You get to see sort of like the guard down when you're talking about other stuff.
Yeah,
and
his show is
that's a great thing.
Information, which is why I love it. Like, his show's information driven, where it's like you watch one of his videos and it's going to be 20 minutes of like interesting stuff that you want to consume. But my show is slightly different. That's why I've had people on, like, this electronic artist, Cell Dweller. Like, I had tons of their he's been like huge in electronic music. His name's Clayton. And but he always has like his lyrics and all this stuff always has like this underlining like thing where like, oh, I feel like this guy is way deeper than what any interview has ever brought out, right? So I have him on, and we literally like don't talk about music at all. We talk about like life and George Orwell and all this stuff. And same thing with Burton C. Bell from Fear Factory, and we talk about philosophy, and we talk about this and that, and it just like, and then I have all these people who are, I see people sharing the show saying, hey, check out this interview. Clayton talks about this. He's never talked about that, or whatever, and it's just like, it's because of that casual conversation. And that's why I like to be like somewhat prepared with certain guests, like have an idea of what I might want to talk about, just in case we get like the conversation like gets stuck somewhere and I need somewhere to go with it. But but for the most part, I like to kind of just take it wherever it goes, because I don't want to stop that journey, because it might lead somewhere that I never would have thought of, and really interesting topic and story or whatever. So it's weird. I mean, but the art of conversation is something that I think people kind of take for granted. I always say it's like the one thing I'm good at is not. People say talking. I'm like, no, wait, let me correct you. I'm like, it's conversation, because I'm like, talking. Yeah. There's a difference. I know people who are really good at talking, but I don't want to have a conversation with them, because they're not listening to you. They're just waiting for their turn to talk, And then there's people who are actually It's like, I know. I think Rogan or somebody has said it, where it's like a dance. It's like, you go, and then I take the lead, and it's like I piggyback on something you said, and then you piggyback, and it's like, oh, you bring up something that reminds me of this story, So it really is. It's this very fun and exciting thing that really forces you to maybe think about memories you haven't thought about, challenge ideas you haven't challenged, all these things. And that's why I think conversation might be the most important thing.
Yeah, and I love those. I mean, I love the Australians, and now I think I might understand why I love the Australians so much, because it's pub culture, right? And the Brits too. I mean,
the Brits.
They're in there, they're talking, they're working out ideas, they're having some drinks, they're busting each other's balls, they're getting into some topics, and that's something that I will say is lacking in the United States. We could be better about that. We could be better about having these conversations. But then again, I think that some people, the reason why they migrate and to Rogan and some of these conversations is because in their head it's like these are the same bullshit conversations I've had with my stoner friends for years, and you feel like you're getting a version of that, or you feel like you could pull up a chair and sit next to them and jump into that conversation really easily because you see a little bit of yourself in them, and that's certainly a good thing. That's the plan, at least I have, for the podcast, which is sort of in the way you approach it as well, which is there's no script here. It's just going to be us talking about stuff. Those are the best interviews I've done, or have been the ones where, what are we going to talk about? We'll talk about whatever. We'll have an idea, but let's not get so regimented that we don't get off topic. If the conversation takes us this direction, let's see where we go. I think that's the best way to do it. Of course, that's why I like your show. That's why and you've always got interesting guests that don't necessarily fit in any sort of particular category. There's a little bit of everybody, and I like that. So
yeah, thank you. Yeah, when I had Jesse Ventura,
obviously that's why you're still doing it after 6+ years.
Yeah, so. When Jesse Ventura was on, just a quick story. His PR people sent me like a list of like, these are the questions we want you to ask. These are the topics we're going to talk about, like all this stuff. And I'm just like, wait, we had him booked for like a month, and I'm like, have you guys listened to one of my episodes? I'm like,
probably not.
Probably not. And I knew right when I got that email, and it was literally like the day before or the morning of the show, and I'm like stressing about it. I'm at work, and I'm like texting my wife, and I'm like, what should I do? I'm like, I don't want to piss him off. What if I don't ask these questions? What if I go completely off topic, this and that? And I'm like, fuck. And I'm like stressing because at the time, he's still one of my biggest guests I've ever had on. And so the show starts, or before the show starts, I'm like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm like, I might never have him on again. I'm like, I'm not going to just give everybody the same interview they're used to. I'm like, I'm going to do me. And I'm like, it's worked till now. I'm like, people seem to like me. I seem to be able to hold a conversation. I'm like, let me not doubt that ability now. And so let me just do what I do. And so we went on. He's supposed to be on for like 20 minutes. He ended up being on for like 40 minutes or 45 minutes. And then he even offered to come back on. He said he had a blast talking, and I just did a regular show. So it's like, even the guests that you think, wouldn't want you to go off topic and enjoy these casual conversations, to them, like you said, it's a relief to them too. Like they like the fact that you're not going to do an interview that's just, typical questions. I'm going to give you the typical answer that everybody's heard before, and it's boring for everybody involved, So
yeah. Yeah.
So I'm excited to hear your podcast, and we'll definitely, like I said, if there's anybody in the archives that I can help with, let me know. I'll give you some information. I've done it in the past for people, and people have done it for me. So
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Yeah, for sure. I'll take you up on that.
Awesome.
Love to have some of those. I'd love to have Governor Ventura on for sure.
Yeah. Well, he's been. It's funny. He's been with the one of the guests that I don't know if he just has different people representing him or not. I haven't seemed to get a hold of him again, because I remember I waited a while. It was like a year later. I'm like, let me try to see if I can get him on. I don't have anybody on coming up, and it's been a nightmare to trying to get a hold of him. I thought about going through Tyrell, because his son's been on my show before. But
I've done Tyrell's show before.
Watching the Hawks. Yeah, great show. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
With Sean,
great show.
Sean Stone, Tabitha Wallace.
Yeah. Sean. Yeah, I reached out to Sean, and Sean's like, "Yeah, let's have you on." So that was my first TV. That was my first TV interview, was with them.
Awesome.
But it was nice because it's just Sean, and Sean's easy to talk to, and he's a cool guy, and so we we had a rough outline of what we were going to do, but once again, we just kind of went where the conversation took us. So
yeah. Sean's been on the show a few times too. Awesome dude. He's another guy. You want to talk about having conversations out in the fringe? He will go down some stoner talk real quick. It's like,
for sure. He killed at an Acapulco last year. He did a topic on the New World Order, and I, I texted him later saying, like, you need like 3 hours. You need, like, David Icke had 4 hours. You need 4 hours to unpack that whole thing, because, you can't do it justice in 45 minutes. You just can't do it. So, but he's a good dude. He has some interesting conversations. But yeah, I appreciate that. If there's anyone that you think out there that you've interviewed before, you think this might be a good guest, by all means, please send them my way. I'd love to.
Yeah,
I'll explore that.
Yeah, I'll definitely do that. There's definitely some people I have in mind that I think would make for a great guest, especially if you're doing a similar type of show like mine. And so some maybe they're guests that you might know of, maybe some that you're not even aware of. So,
love it.
But awesome.
Love it.
Well, thanks, Charlie. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll keep in touch.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
See
Take
you.
care. Bye.
Believe in the ripple effect.